Hi everyone, thanks so much for being here today. My name is Suzanne Morrissette and I am a lecturer Indigenous Studies here at ACAD. It's my extreme pleasure to welcome you here for our second day of the symposium. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that ACAD is situated on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot people and the people of Treaty 7 in southern Alberta here, which includes the Siksika, Piikani, Kainai, Tsuut'ina, and Stoney Nakoda First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. So welcome to day 2, I guess I already said that, but to our symposium, Aaksokgowamoski, the title which was given to us, and I talked about this a little bit yesterday, by Elder Casey Eaglespeaker, is a Blackfoot concept that translates to making relations. And I was talking yesterday about, and I guess I would like to just state again that I'm hoping this title helps us to look at our relationships to local, national, and international narratives of place and belonging as practices of making relation with all beings, including people and the land alike. So thank you again also to our speakers from yesterday for helping us to get started on a great foot. Lisa Myers, Jesse Short, Lindsay Nixon, Bruno Canadian, and Cheryl Larondel. Your presentations opened up so many areas of discussion, and the Q&As were really wonderful. It was such a great opportunity to hear dialogue with faculty and students and members of the public, so thank you all for partaking in that yesterday. I'm really excited to continue these conversations today. And so just before we get started, I'd like to take this opportunity again to offer my thanks to the supporters for this, who have helped to make this event possible. The Alberta College of Art and Design, the Calgary Arts Development, Calgary Foundation Canada 150 Community Fund, Sidewalk Citizen, Suncor, and the University of Calgary. Additionally, our team here at ACAD has been a really incredible support system for this event, and I would just like to mention again my extreme thanks to Lorenzo Fusey, Cassandra Paul, Tina Kinney-Brown, Justin Waddell, Asby Whitecalf, Ashley Scarlett, Ashley Slemming, and Alex Link once again for their important contributions to this event. Thank you so much. And so today we have a really packed schedule, so I'm gonna keep my talking to a minimum here. We have 8 presentations, including one panel, which features 4 of the 6 artists who are included in the exhibition that's opening this evening, Future Memories Present Tense, at the Illingworth Kerr Gallery from 5 to 7. So I'm hoping that after this is over, you'll all join us in moving one door down for a good party for that exhibition and celebration. So yeah, I guess I'm gonna end there. Thank you so much. Can I ask now for your time? Thank you for being here, and we'll get started.
Check 1, check 2. Can you hear me all right out there? Can you hear me all right? I just want to make sure this microphone's working. I've got a very bassy voice. I'm a champion. I also did not mention I'm a champion karaoke singer as well. Sable Sweetgrass, Troy Twig, they can attest to this. So good to see some of my fellow artists out there. Dayna Danger in the house, Adrian Stimson, some powerhouse talent in the house. I'll start with the proper introduction. Okinitzikuwa, friends and family. My name is Aaksokgowamoski. My ancestral name is Wounded Mouth, a name given to me by my grandfather Sikutsumi of the Kainai tribes. This name, I didn't really know the ramifications of receiving this name when I was about 27. Up until that point, my Blackfoot name was Boksukanikapi, which translates to little fat kid. So I had a real Blackfoot identity issue when I was in my 20s. But now I'm Wounded Mouth. I'm very proud of that name. I'm very honored that my grandfather would give me that name. And the story behind that name is Wounded Mouth was one of our ancestors who was almost fatally shot in the face with a musket. And he had a very bad wound, and literally his name became Wounded Mouth, Aaksokgowamoski. And he never complained about it. He never doctored it. He never made any issue about it. He never even talked about it. He had to walk for the rest of his life with this awful scar on his face and never complained about any of it, right until the day he died. So the message I get from my grandfather with this name is that no matter how difficult it gets out there in this crazy world, in this art world, the art world, as you know, some of you may know this, some of you are students, you haven't figured this out yet, but it's a crazy world. It's triumphant, it's tragic, it can be heartbreaking, but mostly amazing. And I'm so thankful that I get to be a practicing artist, that I get to put food on my little traveling table, and do the things that I love to do. And today I'm going to share briefly with you a little bit about what motivates me, the source of where I gather all of my strength in the work that I do across the globe, literally. So my presentation, of course, silent X. I have an X in my last name. It's Smith. It's not Smithx. It's not Smithx. It's just a silent X, like the French. Rubido, Prudo, Soto, Chalafu. This silent X is connected to all of the artwork that I do, all of the curatorial work that I do. It is basically the fundamental allegorical structure of my entire foundation of artwork practices. I want to share this photo with you right off the bat because this is such a critical point in our shared narrative in this time of reconciliation and the Truth and Reconciliation Report reflecting on the residential school experience of survivors, our elders in our communities. This is a photo of my dear grandmother. She's 6 years old, about to enter St. Mary's Residential School on the Kainai Reserve in Blackfoot Confederate Street, right here in Treaty 7. I have to admit that anytime I'm successful, anytime I do something really cool, anytime that I make one of my dreams come true, I always cite my grandmother as the primary source of that achievement. She's my greatest influence. She did so much for me. She had adopted over 40 children during the 60s scoop, right in through the 70s, right until 1979, keeping kids in our communities. And she understood the injustices of the policies that were working against us. And when she passed away in 1997, there were thousands and thousands of people who came to her funeral, and people I'd never met before. I was really shocked, but she impacted so many people. She worked at the Foothills Center, which is a detox center in Fort Macleod, so she would always bring me in to meet with individuals who were recovering from addiction, specifically addiction to alcohol and drug abuse, and she humanized these people for me. She showed me that they're just like any other person. They're just dealing with a lot of trauma, and a lot of that trauma came from the residential school era. So she was a huge influence in helping me see beyond the superficiality that we're fed every day, and she was able to help shape my appreciation for humanity. And I give a lot of props to her and cite her as my greatest inspiration to all the work that I do today. This is a photo of the St. Cyprian residential school that existed. It's been torn down since this time on the Piikani First Nation, where I mostly grew up. And as you can see, there's 4 stories to the school. Most of the structures in the Western Prairie provinces are structured in this way. This was a wood-built structure. It has been since torn down. Some of the other structures were built out of solid brick, and they still stand today. Most recently, the school that my grandmother went to, St. Mary's Red Crow College, burnt down. It was a bittersweet moment because Red Crow College was a great resource for our community. It offered all kinds of programming, Blackfoot studies, and transitional program to get into college and university. So, these structures are really interesting, and I've been working on a really intense story about my grandparents' experience in residential school. It's tentatively called the 4th story of the Sacred Heart, which is the Sacred Heart Residential School on the Piikani Nation, where my grandfather went to school. And on the 4th story is where all of the children stayed, boys on one side, girls on the other side. And a lot of awful things happened on that 4th story. When you were sent to the 4th story midday back to your room, something awful was going to happen. And my grandmother, bless her soul, she never ever imposed that trauma on me. I think she recognized how deadly intergenerational trauma could be, and she protected me from a lot of that, sheltered me from a lot of that trauma, and didn't tell me about these stories. And eventually, as I got older, I started learning from the elders, and now cat's out of the bag. Some really awful things happened in these schools, as indicated in the Truth and Reconciliation Report. So reconciliation, of course, a loaded term. A term that I'm not quite sure who is actually coining this term as the sort of term for the future or the term for the now, but I often believe that this reconciliation word is not the word of the Indigenous people. It is not something we are seeking. We're not seeking to reconcile because we still, to this day, maintain the peace in our territories and maintain a connection to the earth and to that treaty through that ceremony. the Inistsi pipe ceremony. So, I often ask kids, I speak at a lot of schools, I ask them, what does reconciliation mean to you? And of course, the common thread theme is forgiveness. And of course, one of our greatest superpowers as human beings is forgiveness. And in order to truly heal from some of these things, we have to find a way to forgive. But we must not forget that, that in the wake of that type of trauma, that intergenerational trauma, where it's still destroying our communities today, with addiction and violence and still lots of sexual abuse, the missing and murdered Indigenous women's pandemic we're facing in this country. This term reconciliation is a difficult one. It's a contentious one, and it is not one that is actually coming from the First Nations communities themselves. This is a photo of the year I arrived in my grandmother's life. There's my grandmother again, Mary Ann, and there's Buksukanikapi, there's a little fat kid. For any mothers in the house? Any mothers? Any mums? Okay, so for context, when I was born 11 pounds and a few ounces. So I was a monster, and I came out, and look at me, I think I ate the first 2 dogs they got for me. I ate everything inside. I ate the grass, I ate everything. I was just a chubby kid. I think I have 2 marshmallows hidden in my cheeks right there. But I have to say, like, all of that love that my grandmother brought to the community and in protecting all of these kids, it was all bottlenecked and given to me because she stopped adopting kids in 1979, and because her heart kept getting broken. All these beautiful children she was raising were being taken away from her because the parents had recovered from whatever was ailing them, and sort of a reverse apprehension or whatever, and the children had to return to their home. There was a little baby that she was raising, and after 6 months of raising this beautiful boy, he was taken away from my grandmother and returned to his mother, and it devastated her. It broke her heart, and she stopped adopting children at that point. And 2 years later, this little fat kid showed up, and all of that love and attention and all of those beautiful lessons that she carried with her, she gave them all to me. And like I said, I took that knowledge base for granted. I was a very healthy, happy kid. I was an only child living way out in the middle of nowhere near Fort Macleod. We lived on a ranch. We didn't have TV. We didn't, very isolated. So I had to do a lot of imagining. I had to create my own worlds. Back in the days when we played with blocks of wood, nails, and rocks, the good old days. This is my grandfather, and I grew up with an influence of my grandfather being a very scary man. Look at that photo on the right side. Very intense, dangerous. Everyone was afraid of this guy. Fluent Blackfoot speaker, devout Catholic, and later in life, I got to warm up to him, and we tell jokes all the time. And I asked him, why were you so intense? Like, why were you so mean and angry and so hostile? It seemed, and he finally opened up to me about the things that he experienced in residential school. A lot of that violence and that intergenerational trauma was directly impacted on the domestic violence that he perpetuated in our family, in our community, and that I witnessed myself. And that's one thing that we need to recognize, that all of the beautiful artists, Indigenous artists you see expressing themselves, they have to pull together all of these emotions, all of this trauma, have to pull it together, manage it, keep it in the 3-ring circle, the lions, the tigers, and the bears, and be their own ringmaster and articulate themselves in front of crowds like this. I mean, I so admire and respect my fellow Indigenous artists. We're dealing with so much, and right now we're highly politicized with everything from Beaufort Towers to elections to land claims to treaties. I mean, we're constantly having to deal with discourse on an everyday basis, and the moment I step outside after I make my bed in the morning, I'm automatically politicized as an Indigenous person, and even more so as an Indigenous artist. Anybody see the movie or the show? It's a television show called Breaking Bad. Anybody see that show? Okay, this is the road in Albuquerque on the way to Heisenberg's home. A few years ago, a photographer friend of mine, we would travel across North America, visiting different urban Indigenous populations in the major cities like Los Angeles and Chicago, Minnesota. We were in Winnipeg and Vancouver. We went all across the country in 3 months. And we were checking in and seeing how everybody's doing within their regards to their traditional territories, how they're expressing themselves artistically, what is going on. And what I saw was a lot of pride, a lot of strength, a lot of dignity, and a strong connection to the frequencies of their territories. It's still maintained, even in an urban setting. But for everybody around them, there's an extreme identity crisis, especially in America, but even more so in Canada, as we are now in the midst, under the bosom of Canada 150, the sesquicentennial. I've had the pleasure to see many different organizations and festivals and expressions of celebrating Canada's culture and what it is to be Canadian over the last 6 months, and I must say, yes, this identity situation is in full crisis. And a big part of that is because, as the great Dr. Leroy Littlebear says, we've been waiting in the wings since the treaties were signed, and we've been waiting to be activated. And a big part of our identity as a collective society is rooted in the land. Who are the translators of the frequencies of that particular territory? Well, it's more than likely the people of the land. And I hear this everywhere I go. I was in Haida Gwaii working on a feature film called Edge of the Knife, listening to the Haida language, listening to the ceremonies, participating in the ceremonies, hearing the elders speak about the land, the inlet, the whales. And I was blessed one night when one of the whales came and said hello to me. And I said a few greetings in the Haida Gwaii language, and it was really one of the coolest things. And the fact that I could feel the whale and the water and the earth and the mountains there in Haida Gwaii actually understand what I'm saying was really cool. And every time we introduce ourselves in our language, a big part of that is our ancestors don't know how to speak English. They need to know who's in the room and who's talking. That's why we always introduce ourselves in a language, because despite all the empty chairs you see in this room, I guarantee you whenever a Blackfoot artist is up in front of a crowd, every one of those chairs is filled with one of our ancestors. So congratulations on a sold-out show. The X, I'm just going to go through this really quickly. The X, of course, has so many inspirations for me, so many meanings for me. I've added it to my very English name, Smith. Going all the way back to the signing of the treaty, we didn't have John Hancock's signatures at the time. We're an oral tradition. So when it came time to sign the treaty or ratify it, there was an X drawn next to the name of each of the signatories, each of the chiefs and leaders of the Treaty 7 tribes. Now, to this day, it's still debated whether or not Crowfoot and company, Red Crow, and the leaders actually used the pen and wrote, or they actually touched the feather. It's still up for debate. But either way, that X is a reminder to me every day, every time I sign my name for whatever it may be. I'm speaking at a lot of schools this week. I always sign that X, and that X reminds me of the responsibility that I have to Inestsi. Now, Inestsi is the Blackfoot word for peace treaty, the possibility, the intention of peace. The peace pipe ceremony, Inestsi-sin, one of our most powerful ceremonies we have in the Blackfoot culture. And that's what was brought to the table at the signing of Treaty 7 in 1877. That pipe ceremony activates everything, the sun, the moon, the stars, the animals, everything. The reverberations, the idachpoi, the frequencies of the land, everything was activated on that day. Little did Commissioner Laird know that by signing on to this treaty, by smoking the pipe, they ratified their commitment to this treaty, and we've been waiting since 1877 for this relationship to happen. So conciliation never happened in the first place, so reconciliation, to an extent, under the rule of semantics, is a bit of a misnomer. I had the pleasure of traveling to South America a few years ago. I went to Chile. I went to visit the Mapuche people north of Temuco. And it was just an absolutely beautiful experience. I got a chance to participate in the ceremonies. I was learning some of the language, Maparangun. The common language of the country is Spanish. I didn't know very much Spanish, so there's a lot of things lost in translation, but a lot of things activated through spirit. And I got a chance to tell a little bit of our story here in Treaty 7 to them, to the Mapuche people. And of course, their response was one of benevolence and openness and kindness. And they bestowed me with a lot of gifts. They even tried to hook me up with a new wife. So generous. I mean, I was twice her height. I don't think it was going to work out. But the frequencies of the land can only be translated by the people of the land because they've been there for thousands of years translating. Their DNA is rooted in the land. And if you're a new Canadian, a first, second, third generation Canadian living here in Treaty 7, if you really want to gain access, you're going to have to access those portals and those connections through the routers of the land, and that's the people of the land. What happens when you punch in the wrong Wi-Fi code? What happens? Nothing. Not a damn thing. We have all the Wi-Fi codes. And we've been waiting to share with you what's going on, because I guarantee you, you tap into the frequencies of land, it'll boost your Wi-Fi signal every single time. The journey began for Red Talks a few years ago. Now, in the introduction, we have this program that I run. It's called Red Talks, and it's an acronym for Resilience, Empowerment, and Discourse. This acronym will shift and change every 4 years. We'll adopt a new intention, a new alignment of intention. And of course, the X you see is the same X in my last name. It's that reminder. It's that knowledge bundle. It's sort of the permeation of space and time. From a Blackfoot worldview, we don't have a colonized worldview when it comes to time. We see beyond these dimensions. Our spirit travels ahead of us and gives us the go-ahead, and you experience that as deja vu. We constantly are looking for new ways to tap into the frequencies of the land, and a lot of that was lost during the outlawing of our culture. You can thank the Indian Act for that, but we're bringing all of that back in a contemporary setting with this program that we've called Red Talks. And of course, red is a really interesting, it's an interesting image system, because what it's done for us, red image systems, the red skins, the red man, all of that, it has been turned into a lot of negative stereotype. But what we're doing with this Red Talks program is we're inverting it, turning it on its head, taking all that negativity and turning it into something positive. Here's an example of a program we ran a few years ago called Truth, Reconciliation, in the Future, where we use allegorical imagery to tell a story with one image, much like our ancestors did with pictographs many generations ago. The first bear, baby bear, you see there on the right side, is an indicator of the truth. And the truth is a dark truth. We have a shared history. It's a dark history. A genocide did take place in this country. We are recovering from it. We are traumatized by it, but we will prevail. And reconciliation, of course, this conversation is the mama bear, the possibility that we can reconcile and move together into the future. That's the intention from our allies, from our accomplices and our avengers and Indigenous people all across the country and the world. And of course, baby bear to the left, she is looking into the future with hope, and she's looking into the future with courage. She's a representation of what the possibilities are, despite this dark history and this dark reality that we're all faced with. But at the end of the day, we are still superimposed with this thing called the Indian Act, which is the lettering you see there, which was ratified and signed and composed in 1876 by one John A. Macdonald. We're working our butts off to maintain the treaty, because when we sign the treaty, we have an obligation to the earth. We have an obligation to these bears, the Gayu. We have an obligation to you, the newcomers. The Syrian refugees come to this territory. We want to welcome them with open arms the same way we did on September 22nd, 1877. That's our obligation as treaty people. But when David Laird smoked that pipe, same with James McLeod, he also signed you up for that responsibility as well. And this is something you should take very, very seriously, because the frequencies of the land, I tell you, they're beautiful, and boy, are they ever delicious. This is a salmon feast we had at Red Talks in Vancouver. This is our wonderful chef, Shane Chartrand. He's an Indigenous chef from the Cree Nation Enoch in Treaty 6. And we always try to activate Indigenous foods during our intertribal sessions, because I think a return to that type of sustainability, as you can see here, it was really funny. We had a bunch of academics from UBC picking away at their fish, and the chef's like, get in there, get those fingers dirty, get them smelly fingers going. That's the way our ancestors did it. Come on, this is a no white fragility zone. It was a really funny moment, and it was a really funny moment. Everyone walked out smelling like salmon, but that's fine. Salmon's a really tasty thing. And it was smoked salmon. It was one of the best feasts we ever had at a Red Talks program. The nature has all of our answers. I mean, I look to nature for everything, all the most complicated things that we have to face in our reality as a society. The intertribal program, of course, is a chance for everyone to build discourse and sit in talking circles, and also get a chance to speak to the great speakers that we bring onto the program. And of course, the head of security in Red Talks at all of our programs is one wise Truth Smith, my son, who every show, he looks under every chair to make sure there's no bombs. He makes sure there's no bad guys hiding backstage. And he's done a couple interviews himself, and he's already said that it's only going to be a few years' time before he replaces me and pushes me out of the curator's chair. But, you know, the motivation is very clear. We're building a really beautiful community. We're connecting to so many amazing knowledge bases across intertribal lines. And it's been a real pleasure to reactivate our old traditions and take over places like the Bella Concert Hall, and go to places like Chile. And our next program is in San Francisco on November 3rd. We've been invited all over the world, presented at the TEDx conference last year in Banff, and we have so many invitations from around the world. We accepted every single one of them. So we're working on a program, including a program for the Middle East that we're going to host on the borders of Palestine, the Israeli conflict in the Middle East. We're working on that one. We want to bring this inestsi, the spirit and intent of our treaty, to help some of the healing that needs to happen out there in the Middle East. To quickly disseminate a couple of other programs that we run with the Inestsi Treaty Art Society is this program called Noirfoot. We've captured the 2 national languages of this country and we've made them our own. Blackfoot is a misnomer. We are Nitsitapi people. That's what we call ourselves, the real people of the land. And this year, of course, the Noirfoot Initiative is an opportunity to bring professional industry pros, award-winning filmmakers to jam with emerging filmmakers, to jam with brand new debutante rookie filmmakers. So this was our first program in Penticton, and it was amazing program. The Penticton people at Anaukin, the Penticton Indian Band, the Okanagan people, beautiful, sang us some beautiful songs, welcomed us. It was an amazing experience, and we're taking all of those kids to San Francisco for the film festival. Last week, Arts Dance was launched, and we basically, we're activating all of you. We're trying to bring all the artists out to the land in the spirit of our Sundance ceremony. And this is the entire structure of the Inestsi Treaty Arts Society, including the 8 branches that exist, including Red Talks, the Arts Dance, Noirfoot, Elk Shadow, Migration, Bonokamita, our new medicine program, and of course the new program that we're working on for innovation that we're going to launch in 2021. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cowboy. We have time for 1, maybe 2 questions.
Don't be shy.
Somebody's got something to say, right?
Gayla Kessler for that. I wanted to know how you see reconciliation. Is it something that functions within the Indigenous art community, or is it something that's it focuses on the colonizer?
Well, I think it should definitely be colonizer focused, but I mean, even that language is a little problematic. Colonizer, what is a colonizer? I mean, from my perspective, the non-Indigenous people are the ones who are most colonized by their government in terms of mindset, algorithms, conditioning. So, I mean, there's so many layers to this cake. There's decolonization, there's indigenization, and then you break it down to the 600 language groups that we have in this country. It gets even more specific to the territory you're doing your work in. So I would say there's no specific demographic or jurisdiction for this conversation to be coming or going to. I believe we all should be open-minded to it. We should all activate it because it is definitely, like I would say, Indigenous history doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. In this country anyways, it is Canadian history. There's no separation. We need to stop being othered. We can't be Indigenous this, First Nations this. I mean, we're constantly facing that barrier of being othered. Apartheid is a policy that was developed out of what Canada did with the Indian Act and the reservation system. So, I mean, there's a lot of damage there, and we are all part of that retrofitting. We're all part of that reform. And I think we really have to start challenging the language, and we have to start dismantling the systems of oppression across the board, whether it's Indigenous people, LGBTQ, women. I mean, there's so many things that we have to take down. And of course, these are all coming from the patriarchy, the toxic masculinity that is sort of the basis of a lot of the structures that we're subject to today. I hope that answered your question. That was a pretty long answer.
I have a quick one.
Fire
What
away.
are some ways that we could maybe get more in touch with the land?
Just go to the land. Just go out there. Get out there. Get out there and shut up. Listen, like the elders say. You know, there's so much out there. A bird may fly right up to you and speak German to you. No, I'm just kidding. That probably won't happen. But honestly, you really just, I mean, it's a spiritual experience, right? The human experience is like an operating system. It's either Mac or Windows. You need to forget about that. You need to just get out there and listen to the land, connect to the land, look at the rocks, and just listen. Just be quiet, be in your thoughts. Let your spirit do the work for you. And if you want to do it more pragmatically and learn more about ceremony and whatnot, go offer an elder some tobacco. Even in a young Indigenous person, go offer them some tobacco and ask them for a story. I mean, it's as simple as that. We really have to get beyond this fear and fragility complex that we're constantly being confronted with. Just be brave. Be a brave soul and go ask a few questions. Don't be shy. Is that it? We're good? There's one last one over here.
Okay, we're just a little short on time, so if it could be very
Be quick.
Well, thank you for that presentation, Cowboy. It was excellent. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about art stands briefly, I guess, because it's a new initiative. Last week was excellent. I could only make it through a couple hours, but
Yeah.
could you tell us about what's next for art stands and how people can get involved?
Absolutely. In a nutshell, Art Stance is, of course, a confluence of all artists in the Treaty 7 area, whether you're a ballet dancer or a sculpture collective. We want to bring you to the circle, to the Art Stance circle, and bring you out to the land and connect you with Stoney Nakoda elders, Tsuut'ina elders, the Blackfoot elders. Really plug into those frequencies of the land, because I think the land we live in, it's so beautiful in this territory, is probably one of the primary influences with any artistic practice. We are influenced by our environment and our surroundings, and if you could see beyond what you've been told by geologists and anthropologists, you might have a deeper perspective and a more diverse palette to paint from. So you're all invited. Art Stance is 2 years in, and we hope it's around for the next 10,000 years. We're going to make Burning Man blush.
Great. Well, thank you so much,
Thank
Cowboy.
you.
Please join me in thanking.
Let me give you a hug. I'm Tanya Harnett, and my traditional name is Satoya Maniwen. And so I'm happy to be here. Satoya Maniwen means smoke from sweet grass, so I've been blessed with that. It comes with the obligation to heal and to be healed. I'm really interested because right now there's a full moon that's happened, and so you can really feel the power of the full moon. And I'm very happy to say that Energy East was canceled today, and that makes me very happy because it was supposed to go through my reserve, and through a 1957 pipeline. So it being stopped makes me very happy, and my family will be very happy. Also, on the topic of residential schools, news coming in real quick, maybe tomorrow or already today. The Supreme Court has the IP stories, the independent assessment process is going through. Those are all the damaging stories that people did for, it was supposed to be private. They were supposed to be private applications. And they've been in contested territory right now because people thought that they should be put into a public place. But they were filled of trauma and would be like bombs going off in communities. So watch the Supreme Court trials, the deposition, and who watches it like a hockey game? I'm watching it like a hockey game, and I'm waiting for the results to come in either today or tomorrow. So that's coming up soon. So I'm going to be talking about First Nations relationships with museums and what are the obligations there. And first of all, I'm going to be talking about those. I found those, and they puzzled me, but as soon as I saw them, I knew what they were very quickly. I keep finding myself being caught in museums, and it started out as curiosity. I think I was 20 years old when I went to go visit this thing, and I knocked on the door and said, can I come in? And can I go in the back room there? And so I did. And they let me in, and what I found was a poster. The poster had my chief, his regalia on it. This is Carry the Kettle. And for me to see that regalia right there on a poster, it seemed like all my culture was being kept behind the scenes. So I started out being angry, but then I just thought, okay, well, I can just go and look. And they were so amenable for me to just go in the back and use the gloves. That made me go to the museum right beside my territory in Regina. The Royal Saskatchewan Museum. And I found pictures of my great-grandfather there. And I didn't know how the hell they got there. Didn't know what was going on. So somebody curated him into the show. So how does that happen? Well, so what you have there is my great-grandfather, Dan Kennedy, my grandmother. This is my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my grandfather. He served in World War II, but his father served in World War I and II. We're big supporter of the treaties, and we'll hang the Union Jack on our territory because we were down by the south where there was all the trouble with the medicine line and people coming across the medicine line there. So I'm also a descendant of the Cypress Hills Massacre. So there's a lot of history that's taken a look at in my family. And my great-grandfather lived from 1876 to 1976, and he went to residential school. I have 3 generations that went to residential school. Ochangaga, he went in 1886. 1884 was when they first opened the Lebret Residential School in Fort Capel. And so he was an early student. Him living for 100 years and me being around for his funeral, I was 5 at his funeral, he saw the buffalo being slaughtered. And, there's a connection there that it's just like yesterday. So these stories are not that old to me. But with his words, there's a lot of work that I've done from his work. So I then started to work in Blackfoot territory. So I went in 2001, and I have to say that I always know I'm on Blackfoot territory. In the 13 years that I was working in the University of Alberta teaching, or University of Lethbridge teaching, I always know where I am. I know right now that this isn't my territory. And I always felt like the Chinooks that came in were trying to blow me from southern Alberta over back to Saskatchewan constantly. But I really do miss my Blackfoot friends here. And it's something that's always with me. The sound of the language and the landscape is just a part of me now. So thanks for loaning it to me. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the Spirit Sings because this is where we first had the blow up with museums. In fact, actually, Calgary is the place where all blew up. Everything blew up here. So what happened? Well, this show was put together. Some fantastic curators in all their earnestness had put this show together. It took them 5 years. It was for the Calgary Olympics in 1988. And then in 88, and then 2 years before that, there started to be protests. The protests were from the Lubicon. It ended up that this was being supported by Shell Canada. and it was Shell Canada that was messing up the land and the territory of the Lubicon up north. So with this boycott that happened, caused a whole bunch of hullabaloo. There's your Ralph Klein coming out of his car, Lubicon boycotting, and people, business, whatever, opening happening above. So this gives you a little idea of what the situation is. Cartoons are always great for that. But what happened with that was, with this hullabaloo, two things. One, the Lubicon got attention, and there was massive amounts of paperwork that came, and it hit globally. And United Nations made comments on who owned the land. They were missed in the treaties, so they didn't have treaty status. So they never gave up their treaty. They had they were a sovereign nation. So for them having to fight for just existence, and this show, the Spirit Sings, going up during the Calgary Olympics, it seems terrible and an injustice. Out of that, what was put together was something called the Task Force report. Now, this is great because with all this controversy, the controversy ended up going to international levels. People were upset internationally. But with the task force, people went to, the show went to Ottawa, because the Spirit Sings went from Calgary to Ottawa. But when it got to Ottawa, they had a conference. And within this conference, they decided that they were going to put this task force together. The task force was put with traveling by Trudy Hicks and Tom Hill. And it took them 2 years. They came across the country from 2 years, so 1990s. With that, this was released, and this is still the primary document that internationally people still look to. This is the ruler. So what happens with this is, how do you deal with art from First Nations perspective? How do you include them? What did Spirit Sing do wrong? And museum staff were really wanting to get this corrected. So that was something that happened when I was 18. I was pretty young when that happened. But when I started to work with the Glenbow again, I was called in for something called Honoring Traditions. And I was looking at some ledger drawings that were from the museum here. And I was asked if I would do some work for this Tracing History show. Adrian, call out again. Adrian was in this show, Faye Heavyshield, and Terrence Fool. And the four of us put something together for this, and I responded to this with something on the smallpox that happened on my reserve. And looking at this, thinking the dark figures, and we know that smallpox came up the Missouri on a steamboat called the Antelope. That's a longer story, but we'll just leave it for that. So that all was shown up at Honoring Tradition. And this is 20 years after the Spirit Sings, and nothing has been shown from the collection, what's in the back in the storage room. Nothing had been shown again from the Spirit Sings for 20 years. So this was a big celebration. They put a whole bunch of work together. They put contemporary work. They put traditional work. I had snowshoes up, and Adrian's buffalo, postmodern buffalo was up, so it's a buffalo hide on a teepee stretcher, or on a painting stretcher. And actually, I've given you a lot there. This was, he's connecting to collections. This event happened, which was 20 years after, and Richard Richard Brown was helping put this event together at the time. So I remember we were all in this big, long table, all the way from here to the end. And, you know, people had come and did talks, and most of us sat on this panel. And at the end, who was going to be sitting here was the Lubicon representative. And I was wondering why would they have a poster up, and who was going to represent Lubicon? And it ended up being Bernard Omniak, who had been the chief since when the Spirit Sings happened, since the protest, the initial protest. And to this date, Bernard is still the chief. So when he was here, he didn't get a chance to talk. He was absolutely silent. At the end, he got the microphone as everything came down, and people had done speeches, and all the curators, you know, were congratulating themselves. Joan spoke too, and she was great. Joane Cardinal-Schubert. But to not have Bernard have very much to say made me mad. So I did go back and do some work, some water series, and I looked at going back to Lubicon and trying to figure out what was going on there. But from that, I'm looking at time. From that, it bothered me so much. Now I'm thinking, okay, maybe we didn't do something right. Sure, we've had changes in museums. Museums have made strides to engage with Indigenous people. More Indigenous people are coming to work in galleries. But we didn't do one thing. We changed what's in the box, and we shifted everything around. But what we didn't do is the second part. We didn't think about what's happening outside the box. So, although people are in that cartoon up on the floor and they're congratulating themselves, like, look what we're doing, the people outside the box, the Lubicon people, have not been answered to this day. So I'm thinking next year, 30 years after the Spirit Sings, something should be brought up about environment, because had we listened to the Lubicon, maybe we wouldn't, if we addressed Lubicon's issues, maybe we wouldn't be here today. So I'm gonna keep going. Jerry Conate, a really good friend of mine. I miss him terribly. He put together the First Nations Sacred Ceremonial Object Repatriation Act. We have NAGPRA down in the States. We have this in Alberta, and this piece of legislation is a huge influence on how everybody else is working in the world. They're always looking at what's happening with this. Jerry was such a generous man. When he put together his book, We're Coming Home, he had the people who were experts, the Aboriginal people who were experts, bring in the work. These guys were traveling. Alan, Jerry Potts, Frank Weaselhead, Herman Yellowhorn, Chris McGow, Narcissus Blood, the Heavyheads family. Anybody else got names to throw out? Some of the women from the Motukik. These people went to places. They learned how to repatriate. They became experts in it. They'd knock on the door and say, "Hi, yeah, we're here." And they'd go in and they'd just tell them how this repatriation was going to happen. So they were really good at it. Then I keep getting into museums. So I go see the ROM. I know who works there. I know it's Arnie Brownstone. I'm not going to talk to him. I'm just not going to the back room because I get stuck in the back room all the time. So I'm not going to go to the back room, and I'm going to go through the museum like a normal human being. But I get to a whole section, and they have all carry the kettle stuff there. And I'm just blown away. How come there's so much carry the kettle stuff? Well, it had to do with Edmund Morris. And of course, this is a drawing by Edmund Morris, and he had a great collection. And so that's it. I have to go see what the hell's going on. I have to understand why is there so many. So I phone up get to the information. Okay, can I talk to Artie Brownstone? And we spent the day with the collection. He said, you know, I have the dress on your grandfather's book. I didn't know where it was. So this going back into collections is personal. It's a personal thing. And I think every First Nations people do feel it's personal. So how do we negotiate those spaces? I think it's important that we do. So I have a funny story. This is, I was invited to go to Pitt Rivers. And Pitt Rivers, has anybody seen Pitt Rivers? It's crazy. It's a crazy place. It's in Oxford. It looks like the Paddington Station. And inside it, it's a giant curio cabinet. It's the world's largest curio cabinet. So you have all the ores from the colonies in the ore section, and you have all the spoons that they're all separated. It doesn't make sense. So the cultures are broken up into, it's a bad system. It's a colonial system. And so, but Pitt Rivers said he wouldn't put this building up and give the collection unless the collection didn't stand anywhere but in time. It has to stay in situ. And so it does, it's in situ. But I was invited to do a show there, and this is where this new part of the building, it's a Leeds building, and I stood right there and thinking about what the hell is going on, because on the other side was my show on this wall, along this wall, on the flip side, my work was sitting there. And I was thinking, geez, you know, I'm looking at dates and times and thinking what's going on, and it's just messed up. The Enlightenment period just is crazy. So, so when I'm looking at these works, I'm seeing what the industrial nation, the Industrial Revolution did to our territories. That's how quick that was. I'm wondering how the hell can these people think? Okay, so then I'm there for the first week. And in the first week, I have to finish this. In the first week, they have classes, and the students go up to the bar, and they're having drinks and being crazy stuff. All of a sudden, these people come down, and they're wearing sequin hats. The girls are wearing sequin hats, and the guys are wearing this feather thing. And I, wow, this is Oxford. You'd think they'd have some. So I run up to the guy, and I say, what's going on? Oh, we're just having a party. And I said, okay. Yeah, but, you know, and he said, yeah. I said, well, you know, I'm Indian. And he goes, oh, you're Native American? I said, yep. And I'm just wanting I wanted the headband, right? And so I said to him, and he goes, oh, so are you rather put out? And I'm looking, okay, yeah. And then he says, like, what do you do? What am I going to say, right? And he goes, well, you know, with the Americans and all. Like, it had nothing to do with the British. It's like it was shooting movies, blah, blah, blah. He didn't even get it. So this is how they're thinking. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm going to take that headband, and I'm going to count coup, go back to my hotel room, and I am going to put that headband on, take a self-portrait, and I'm taking it back to the place, the Pitt Rivers, and I'm going to sign it, and I'm going to call it the Oxford Indian. And now I'm a member of their tribe. It got accessioned. It's in the collection. And they said, oh, but we want that too, the regalia. So that is in the collection. So this is a place where you can interrupt collections and then say, you know, this is how we can find places to interrupt. Now, this might be a kudos to Sonny. So I'm thinking, with this, I find these Glenbow gauntlets, and and somebody here might know about the story about how these were auctioned off. I recognized them right away. They were in this case. See them down in the bottom corner. They're at the trading post in Banff. They're $2,000. $2,000. You can get your Glenbow cufflink. And let's go back to Sonny. Well, I'll skip through this part. There's the auction. There's 162 things sold. I take the gloves. I drop them. I bought them first. Took them back to the store, the gift store in Glenbow, and I've taken them back into the Glen, put them in front of the display case. What I'm going to do is going to be writing the Glenbow and saying, what happened with the money? What's going on? These are Nakota gloves, and you let them go. And you didn't ask. You were in charge of these, and who says you can deaccession? So this is going up in a show pretty quick, and this isn't done. This is in process. Kudos to Sonny, because this is really similar to Sonny's work that he did with the faces. Okay, that's it.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Tanya. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Any questions? Yeah. Yes.
I guess, Tanya, just one question too. Are there any sort of more out-of-the-box museum experiences you think that are necessary for giving Indigenous people back our voices?
Out of the box of, working, it's working with the ground floor, working with communities. If you don't work with communities, you need to be finding out what the voice is from the perspective outside the box, and then let the people like Jerry Conate, let the speakers, the people who believe in it, who want to do something, let them into the box and let them stage things up. There's a meeting place in between. Yeah. Thanks, Steve.
Hi, thanks for that presentation, Tanya. I want to reference something Danielle Black said last week in an equity and diversity conversation about collections, where she talked about these objects and these collections have spirits, and that was talked about a little bit this morning at the Lodgepole Center as well. And these objects are crying and need to come out from behind the glass. You referenced a couple different reports within that presentation, and I'm wondering if there's any recommendations there about returning this regalia, these cultural objects back to their families and their homes, and also, how we can move forward with that.
Actually, what I want to do is, by the time I'm finished this, I'm assuming I'm going to have a lot of correspondence back and forth, and I know the photo series isn't done yet. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in a cylinder box with the prints, and then I'm going to send them back to the Glenbow and have them take it in. They're going to have to, it'll be a statement of, here you go, you either take this or it's going to go someplace else, right? I'll make sure it's in a collection somewhere else. But if it's going back to the Glenbow, it'll serve as a reminder not to give our stuff away. Yeah.
Well, and traditional,
Yeah.
Yeah, you're supposed to, never, it's a problem.
Thanks. Okay. Anything else?
So that's a little bit short on time for questions for Tanya's talk, but thank you so much, Tanya, and please join me in thanking Tanya for her talk. Thank you. And just before we take a break, Tanya did have a presentation that she would like to make to Lindsay, I understand. So I'm going to pass the mic back to Tanya.
So Lindsay is editor-at-large for Canadian Art, and of course this is her work for the... I'm so proud of her for what her work has done. She's been doing some great work. To be able to say that she's the first person who has put together the first Indigenous Canadian art.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Dayna Danger. I grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I'm currently based in Tiohtià:ke, which is the Mohawk name for Montreal. But in that space, I'm also a guest there. And so in that space, a lot of Anishinaabe and Mohawk people have kind of gone through that area. So I'm really excited to be presenting. I feel really blessed because I'm surrounded by like such amazing kin and folks that I really admire, people that have paved the path for a lot of us kind of like up and coming. And so I always like to take a moment to like just really make space for that to be known, because I think a lot of us think about our hard work, but I really like to think about those who made it easier on the generations to come. And then I also think about my way of like how I'm gonna do that work too, because it's just a really good thing to be thinking about always. I'm really I'm really honored to be here. But I feel like I'm a guest here, and so I feel excited to be in this territory. So, Chimigwich for letting me come here and talk to y'all. Thought about talking about something that's coming up. There's going to be a launch. There's a Two-Spirit conference that's happening in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and it's called the Two-Spirit Conference that's happening there through the University of Winnipeg, and I think Winnipeg Art Gallery is involved and some other folks, but they asked me to write an article, which is kind of hilarious because I don't write at all, but I like to talk though, so that's good. So having to figure out how to talk about what it is that you do or what it is that you're interested in was really challenging, but I'm gonna kind of like move through it in the way that of like how I make art. So Bibeshwendam is a word that means as close as it can mean to intimacy in Anishinaabe-Moan, or through my language, which is like, I'm around a lot of Ojibwe speakers or Anishinaabe speakers, so it's when I'm back home, it's hard in terms of like identifying as Métis and Saulteaux. I guess it could get really complicated, right? In terms of like breaking down like the language that your ancestors would have been speaking and stuff like that. I still don't know how to introduce myself, so that kind of is like maybe a little bit of a sore spot for me, but I know that with time I'm going to learn. I'm also not in a territory necessarily that like would speak my dialect and things like that, so still trying to like learn and going back every year to like learn more about that. But essentially this word came from a co-thinker, Michael King, from Ojibwe Language Fix, which is on Facebook. And this is like how some of us get connected to our languages, right? So I literally asked, we have a word for intimacy, and there's a huge thread. If you look up Bibeshwendam or intimacy on the Ojibwe Language Fix, you're gonna get this whole thread of like elders telling me about how the language works and like how it's kind of, sometimes it's a little bit hard to like translate English words into, and so it's kind of like backwards, because I'm trying to like learn my language by, with this like language that I speak right now, which is English, right? And this is like all I've known. So it was a big learning experience, but essentially, I guess I really wanted to know that because I wanted to understand more about myself, really is what it comes down to. And this kind of underlying the transformative non-monogamy and romantic friendships. Like, what the fuck does that mean? So this is a still, or rather, it was the before the video. There's a 20-minute video, which is probably it's like the average length of a pornography film, and it's me and a dear friend, Parneet, trying to be intimate with each other, as much as that will allow when you're rocking moose antlers strapped on. And I'm really obsessed with antler strap-ons, as you can kind of see from this image right here, which is on the cover of Canadian Art. I have about, I would say, over 40 individuals that rock these antlers for me, all folks of many different kind of gender identifications and backgrounds. And I don't know, I wanted to actually see what it would feel like to get close and get connected. And Parneet, my relationship with Parneet has been really transformative in the ways in which I relate to other people, which I kind of speak about in the article. But I mean, even so, when we first kind of met, one of our first hangouts was in a bathtub, and just sharing some bubbles essentially, and just talking about who we are. And I didn't even realize you could have that possibly with somebody. And that's not to say that everyone, in order to have a really close relationship, has to get into a bathtub with them, although I would encourage you to, because it's really great. But I mean, I think it just speaks to the kind of levels of intensity and belonging and sharing that I want to have with my kin and folks that are really close to me. So to kind of take that back a little bit, I was often thinking about, I've been, I guess more recently in my work, I've been thinking about closeness and what constitute kinship and our relationships together, and what that could look like. Because I mean, I was raised Polish Roman Catholic. This is a photo of me and my sister together. And I have this affinity for placing things in front of my crotch, which I will gladly take that title, that's fine, whatever that title may be. But I don't know, I'm really interested in lots of different kind of symbolism that comes along with my images. I feel like photography is a great way of being able to show visually the things that I really care about, and those connections. And you don't always have to get it, but there is always this level of respect I feel like we should all have for each other's artwork. And then especially when I started doing the big guns work with the antler strap-ons, the only sort of pushback I got is people were like, well, this isn't empowering, or this is this, or this is that. And I mean, really, if it resonates with you, this is for you. And it's the concept of that everything doesn't have to be for everybody, and that I'm speaking to the folks that that resonate with this, that maybe aren't necessarily represented in media, and even with my own body and how I feel that relates to the rest, and all these ways in which I don't measure up. And always feel you have to spend so much time to, for an idea that was never really, there's never any way to win that idea. You're never, that standard that you're held up to, you're never gonna be able to reach it, because it's kind of idyllic and doesn't actually exist. There's so much beauty in each one of us in that way, and maybe that's this utopian idea, or something that's far-fetched out there, but I don't know, it's just I just wanted there for a space for people just to be, without having to feel bad about just being. So this kind of came when I was doing my my MFA, my graduate degree at Concordia University. So I've been out in that area for 5 years now, and I really missed my sister. And so I started to do work that was really personal, that I was oh man, I don't know if anyone's ever gonna get this or understand this, and that's okay. It's just sometimes you just need to do certain things. So we would do these things where we would dress up and even push our identities, or things like that, this one is a lot of my ideas of where when I make work comes from jokes, and I mean, this is a really harsh joke, but I used to make fun of my sister because on her Métis, we have these Métis Federation cards or whatever, Manitoba Métis Federation cards, and hers was super late, and when we got it, her face was super blended into the background, and so and I said, that's probably why I got lost, you're literally a ghost, maybe they couldn't even find you. So but I mean, my sister took that in stride and gave me the look, as often siblings do when they're you can just feel it. So then, I don't know, I just like wanted to take it to the next level, and so I kind of like pushed that with her. But yeah, so I started making this work called Sisters, and it was literally every time that we had grown up together, I pretty much like, I feel like I helped raise my sister in many ways. My mom wasn't really around, and still love her in every sort of way, but like, it's just like something you got to do. And I think that a lot of like other siblings out there can like resonate with that, of just like making sure that like the folks that are close to you are taken care of. And so every time she would come through, I was like, I know this isn't your thing, but like maybe you just want, and she was like more into it than I was. Like she was just like ready, just like put on whatever costume, anything like that. I mean, maybe they are like costumes, or maybe they're like something that means something to us, but that's kind of where that series came from. And then I started to branch out to other folks, which I'll show later on, work that I haven't touched in a long time. But I don't know, I just wanted to like include other people. I mean, I often am actually photographing other folks, or thinking about other folks' representation. And so, yeah, just decided to kind of go backwards, as I'm a contrary person, to just like show something like really personal and vulnerable. So this photo has already made the rounds through Lindsay's presentation, and that's like just fine with me. This is part of the mask series that I'm now working on. So a lot of these masks are beaded for people. I don't know, I have like, I guess you know, in art we have like these rules or sources that we make for the work, and so they're both wearing masks that were made for other people, but for me it was really important, is I just really cared about the relationship that Lindsay and Sasha, who the work is named after, I just like cared about their the relationship, and to be able to see to want to uplift those like really special relations that folks have with each other, and to recognize it. And I think that's what's really beautiful about non-monogamy, is like this idea of ownership and jealousy, and how we can like hold space for that to exist, because it's in our bodies, it's there, and there's a reason why we get jealous when, you know, even with friends. I remember I've had experiences where I see folks hanging out, and I'm just like, you know, just like wishing I was there, could share that. But it's also something that you just have to learn, that that those relationships can exist like beyond you, and that you can actually, what's even more transformative is to kind of like uplift them and be like, I see this and it's beautiful, and like, you know. So I mean, that's like something that's in the back of my head when I'm making work of like who I want to lift up, and in those ways, and like yeah, and even like little simple gestures, like showing the tattoo that they got together, you know, things like that you wouldn't necessarily notice or see, and they're kind of, this work exists as a diptych, like I would always like it to be shown together for those reasons. But yeah. And I use a lot of old film practices too, which I think is really personal, because it really slows down time, and this constant like push that we're often feeling of like going. So I am challenging myself in those ways to do stuff that makes me really uncomfortable, because I mostly do digital photography, and I liked having that control of being able to see things instantly and know what everything feels and looks like. But there's kind of this mystery and magic that happens with film. So now I shoot like large format film, and it's really complicated, because my feelings about process and that time that goes into those things, I just like wish I could just like fast forward it, and then to be able to challenge yourself when you see those things that are coming up for you, and like why do you have like that pushback, and like to really challenge that. So this new work now though is more focused on, I've kind of taken away the eyes on these masks. And I guess there should be maybe a little bit of background to context. I always like to get ahead of myself, because I'm just like so excited to show stuff sometimes. But the masks, I commissioned these masks from a friend of mine who's a leather worker in Montreal. And from there, I've had the help of two other amazing Indigenous artists, Trisha Livingston and Nicole Redstar, to help me bead these masks as well. And usually what happens is I'm beading the tattoos of the individuals. I've beaded my own. I beaded for my friend Candace and Adrian, who's here on the poster as well. And usually it's something that I find that's interesting in why they would get certain symbols, and then we put them on the mask, and they almost like wear them. Well, they don't almost wear them, they do wear them, and then I photograph them in them. And when we're talking about like museums and objects, I'm thinking about how they're like belongings. Like I look at these masks and they're belongings. So when like currently these masks are on display at the Winnipeg Art Gallery for the Insurgents Resurgence show, and they're by themselves. They're not with like the photographs of the folks. And I mean, they can, because I feel like they can stand alone, but also when that comes down, the hope is that they return to the people that I beaded them for. And that's like I feel like it's a huge gesture because there's so much time and labor and like sweat and blood and all these things that went into to make these masks. And then, you know, the goal is for them to like be able to use it for however they want. And I mean, I often talk about BDSM and how it can be transformative. I often talk about how we can decolonize kink because it is very much seated in these like, because it's very close to power, it can sometimes reflect society of like who has power over what and who. And in those spaces, I feel like it can be transformative because you get to call the shots with whoever you were in a scene with, is what we call them, I suppose, like when two people, or when folks play together rather. And it can be transformative in those ways because in those moments you can suspend reality. Maybe in the outside world you are seen in a certain way, and the things that you're into are seen in a certain way. So in those moments you get to negotiate your yeses and like, I mean, you get to negotiate your no's, but what I think is transformative is you can say like what your yeses are, what you're into, and be able to have the space to heal and play those kind of things out. So yeah, and so I mean, I'm just trying to, you know, explore that with the work that I'm making now. So these are like the circles on the face are based off of Adrian's tattoos, which are like the cycles of the moon, and how like the moon is a really like important force for, at least in my teachings, but I'm sure in a lot of other folks' teachings as well, and just like what that means to like all of a sudden lose the gaze in a photograph. And I know that there's been a lot of history that says you need, in order to be empowered, you need to be like, or at least in like if you identify as female or whatever, that sort of history is you know, to have that gaze. And that's why the folks are looking at you in the Big Gun series. They're looking right at you. So there's like that kind of interruption of voyeurism, but I want to kind of play with that more because I'm not really saying it's empowering or not. It's whatever it is for that person, you know? So the newer works now are kind of like playing with those different symbols of how folks like relate to each other, the mirroring that happens. And I mean, it's relatively new, so it's harder to speak about it for me in this moment, especially on the spot with all these lights and people looking at me. But, you know, that's okay. I like a challenge. So these are like brand new works that I'm like starting to show and like think more about in terms of like how we relate to each other. And there's a lot of twins coming up, so I like that too. And in specific, these are both folks that are in these images are fraternal twins as well. And just like those kind of like connections, and maybe that's more speaking about blood, but I think it can go beyond that. So yeah. So ultimately, Bebeshwan Dam for me is like this kind of like concept of like what it means to be close to somebody, whether it is a lover, it is a friend, it is like somebody that you share space and time with, really. And I kind of like want to think more about those concepts and have the space to do that. So I'm sure it seems to be always reflected in my work and like the way I think. But yeah, that's mostly what I have to say about that. But I've been feeling pretty heavy because back home, I'm not sure if it's across Canada, but there was a vigil for the murdered and missing Indigenous women, but I also want to include, you know, trans and two-spirit and non-binary folks into that as well that kind of get erased when we're talking only about women and girls, and how there's these really harmful like things that are at play. Like, I mean, Cowboy spoke about like this epidemic, or like this just of the ways in which we're harmed. So whenever I'm feeling kind of a bit ungrounded and stuff like that, I always like to revert back to song, and was really fortunate to hear Cheryl share yesterday. And I also wanted to share because I sing in a group called Odaya, and we're all from different nations. There's 4 of us, but it's been going on for many years before me and will go on many years after me. But just like being able to share a song with, when you're in an unfamiliar territory or space and you're just trying to find community. So the song that I'm going to sing, and I'm only going to do one part of the 4 because we often sing in 4 to reflect all 4 directions. But is a song that was gifted to me by my mom. She does a lot of like singing with women who have FASD, and it's as a way of connecting them back to their culture. They get them on the powwow drum and like teach songs and like share language. And Dancing Eagle Spirit was a woman, is a woman who shared this chant with my mom, and so this is the song that kind of came out of that, and it's called the White Bear Song, and it's for all folks that are affected, whether they're the women that's affected or folks that are affected and the families surrounding. And like what the song is called the White Bear Song, and it's like it's that medicine. So yeah, I'd like to just share if that's okay with everyone. I don't have a drum, I realize as well, so I'm gonna go a cappella or something like that, but as it is, I'll remember. It does, eh? Yeah, it could be. Yeah, actually, this is good. No, it's a good suggestion, actually, to keep the time. Way-a-hey, 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 way-a-hey. Getche-wa bishkwa-ma-kwa, getche-wa bishkwa-ma-kwa, getche-wa bishkwa-ma-kwa, way-a-hey, 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 way-a-hey. Getche-wa bishkwa-ma-kwa, getche-wa bishkwa-ma-kwa, getche-wa bishkwa-ma-kwa, way-a-hey, way-a-hey. Chimigwich for your time. Maybe this one. Yeah.
Not quite on yet. Any questions from the audience, please?
I'll give you one, buddy.
Thanks, buddy.
I was curious, you mentioned about giving space to LGBTQ and non-binary folk into the murdered and missing Indigenous women's, which I think is important. I don't think I have enough of the information to speak directly to it. I was just curious because there was a chief in British Columbia who wanted to add men and boys to that, and there was a big backlash to that in BC and across Canada because there's already been enough focus on the patriarchy and how men and boys are treated in the society, but they are disappearing and being murdered as well. Yeah, I don't really know where my question is, but I was just curious about how it all comes together because they are important. Like, yeah, it's an important conversation to see how Indigenous peoples have been treated in Canada's history. So how do we make space for all these people who have been murdered or disappeared or disparaged? Do you think there's an answer, or is there?
Yeah, of course. Like, I think that everyone is like hurt and affected by the patriarch. Like, everybody suffers in some way or another. But I think it's like the level of violence that happens to women and girls, and then the lack of like kind of like conversation that comes around like non-binary, two-spirit folks like that are in that, especially like trans two-spirit, or like if folks identify under that, like, you know, because we have all these labels, and I was thinking about that quite a lot after a conversation last night of just like of how we all identify ourselves, and I was thinking about just like the level of violence that happens, like, and how, you know, the murder rates, because folks don't understand, it's a really, I feel really emotional, like, thinking about it, because it's like I identify as like cis, I identify as like a woman, and so it's not really my space to like kind of take that up in terms of like what should be done, like what needs to happen from that perspective, But what I will say is like it is our job to like make sure that like people remember that, and that for a lot of us there wasn't a lot of labels in like terms of like how we even relate to each other, and like why is there so much harm for like our trans brothers and sisters versus like the rest of us. And it's just because of the way that society has been built. And I think that we just need to like hold space and like really understand that it's just like a huge lack of like resources and like safety that's given to folks that are under that umbrella. And I know that I don't know, I just like think that sometimes it's like left out of the conversation. And Jeffrey McNeil, who's from like out west, curated me into a show, and he has a dress that is for those folks that are left out of that, because Jamie Black definitely has a huge part of the Red Dress Project, which is like bringing awareness to that. But I mean, I think Jeffrey's also speaking to the folks that it's a dichotomy, right? It's male or female, and it doesn't give a lot of space for other folks to exist. And I think that that's just like can be a colonial structure, and like how much of that affects our communities and our teachings and who gets to receive teachings. You know, I Sundance, and it really pisses me off that, you know, there's only two places you can go as men or women. And I think that's like a bigger discussion that has to come up, because I don't want to step on my elders' toes, but literally people are being denied or don't feel comfortable or even safe going to ceremony. And that's like a big problem. So leave it up to folks. If like Indigenous folks are making space for themselves and not waiting around for like the colonial, like, you know, this whole like society that we've structured in Western society to flip, we have to make our own spaces. And that even comes to Two-Spirit folks, and like what energy do they need, and like what resources do they need to be able to have those spaces and be able to do ceremony in a safe way, you know? So just like things that I'm thinking about. I guess there's not really, there is answers, and it's just like, you know, you need to support, you just need to support other folks, like bottom line, and whatever it is that they need. So is that money? Is that a place to stay? Is that like, you know, redirecting resources? Like all these things, like how can that actually like, you know, get to them? So.
I guess just because this cover is like staring out at us, and you never really got to talk about it. And also maybe, I don't know if you want to name drop what's happening with this in the future, because we were talking a little bit last night about how this only ever exists in the gallery as the way it's supposed to be, and outside of the gallery it's been different.
Word. Well, this, I mean, let me just take a look just so I remember. Yeah, this is the censored version. The Big Uns is never actually censored ever, and they've only ever the folks that are, the individuals that are in each of the photographs have only ever existed in gallery spaces. I'm pretty strict on the no photography rule as a photographer. Wow, that seems really backwards, Dayna, but you know, the fact of the matter is a lot of people don't have agency over their bodies, and particular bodies, depending on where they are, can be penalized for being naked on the internet or like out there in the world. There's a lot of context that's lost when on the internet, of course, and the amount of sharing. And I think that until we can actually truly feel safe to like walk out our doors knowing that we're like naked on the internet or things like that, that's how I'd like to keep it. But I really wanted to have an uncensored version on Canadian art, and it was green-lighted until it wasn't. And I was like actually surprised. I was like, wow, really? They want like a, you know, topless, whatever that's, you know, supposed to mean, photo of an Indigenous woman. That's pretty powerful. Yeah, that's not, I don't think the world is ready for it, obviously. And so there's a billboard project that Leanne Martin's doing, and there's other, like, I think it's like 50 other Indigenous artists that are going to be on these billboards. And she had pitched the idea of this, and then I asked, well, what version do you want, though? Like, can we do the uncensored version? And no, we cannot do the uncensored version. So that work is, it's just really speaking to like how there's still that stronghold on our bodies and how we want to be represented, because I'm sure there's lots of folks out there that would say, you know, well, how can this not perpetuate violence and like all those sort of things? And I just said, like, I mean, it just, you gotta like examine why you would feel that way. Like, why do you think that like that is? And like what sort of like what like it really comes down to agency is what I think it really is, and like letting people make their own decisions about that. And like, why would somebody putting their naked body out there be like, why would they need to receive violence over that, or be unsafe because of that, or like lose jobs because of that? I mean, we don't come into the world thinking that our bodies are gross and weird and like, you know, so like why, or, you know, that we should receive violence, and exponentially because Indigenous women do receive a lot of violence, like depending on like what other racial status you sort of have. Like I think it's really important to have those conversations.
How is this picture censored?
The hair was elongated. So she got some like hair extensions to cover her breasts. I did not do it, I refused to do that. Yeah, I mean, it was like a really hard conversation because I was wondering if I should just pull it all together, because the whole idea of the work is that we're not seen as objects, whatever, even if you're a woman, there's non-binary folks in this work, there are trans folks in this work, and I don't tell you what that, like how they identify, because they're all part of this like group together as they should be. And I suppose, yeah, I mean, you know, turning like, you know, kind of like covering that, maybe it does seem like it's against of like what I'm trying to say, but that just like really just speaks to me about like what I'm still up against in terms of like showing work and our bodies and like how we want to be seen or whatever. So I'm gonna keep doing it. They can't really stop me. Like I got, what am I, 30 now? So I still got a good, like I'm hoping like 60 to 80 years. So I'm gonna keep trying to disrupt, who knows, science, right? Like, and healing and like, you know, so, right. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dayna.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yay, all right. Well, I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'd much rather be giving one of those talks. In those talks, I sit in my room week after week, in my introverted space, writing, thinking, and so on. And this project is a public project, and it's a space where I have to extend myself very uncomfortably in spaces. And it's in the midst of process. I'm not even halfway through, and so a little nervous about talking about it. But I do want to acknowledge that I'm on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot people and the Treaty 7 people, the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, Stoney and Dakota First Nations, and apparently the Métis people are making some kind of claim on these territories like everywhere else. And I'm a proud member of the Métis Nation, I should say, and that'll become pretty clear. So I started this project just recently. It's the Tuatana Bridge, Tuatana in Cree, I understand to mean valley. And I'm going to lead up to it, though, by starting off with this presentation I made about 3 years ago in Canmore. I was invited, even though I'd never done any public work except for performance, that kind of thing. And I decided to do some research. They had asked me to take a critical view on public art. And so these folks, the Alberta Public Art Network, meet once a year to discuss how to do a better job, I guess. And so I thought, I had two titles. One was Learning from Vandals. And so I'm looking at why the works of public art that people vandalized and theorizing why they might have done so as a sort of vote. And then the other one was looking at juries and why juries are destined to make bad choices. And you think it would be easy showing some slides of bad art, right? Like, to me, this is atrocious. But many people said, well, it's not that bad. And I think this is bad, too. I actually think the one on the right is worse because I'm a kind of anti-formalist art person. But other people see it as a kind of crowning achievement. So I don't know where to go. So I picked these actually from a website called Bad Public Art. So it wasn't a matter of my opinion. It just gets worse. So in that talk, I was really loving art from, well, all over Europe, particularly Eastern European countries, post-Soviet countries. And this one's from Bulgaria. This is my all-time favorite. So this is a case of really profound vandalism in my view. I mean, that took a lot of time and care. It's sort of anxious about Western culture, but also appropriative. It's this uneasy balance. But the sort of idea that I was getting across was that sometimes public art outlives its usefulness. Its ideas are passé and so on. So you got to tear them down or redecorate. And then, of course, because this was Canmore and near Calgary, I had to talk about this piece. And in my research, I found out that these guys who did this, a German firm, did great work. I'm not going to do the whole talk, but they did, everything else I saw was wonderful. And this one was bad. And it was bad because they had to do whatever, and they were, the rule is that they had to include some street lights because the city said, we'll have to have some lighting on this area. So they just, I thought it would have been a joke, but it was taken seriously. And, you know, if Mayor Nenshi doesn't like it, there's something wrong. So the thesis in that part of the talk was about committees. And so what I found in looking at good jury, or the results of good juries and not so good juries, was that the good juries, or the bad juries, they're more interesting. You had people there who were community people, and you had artists on the juries. Now the artists know lots about art, but they know about gallery art. And the community people know their communities, but they don't know art at all. And when you put them two together, you're going to get the least common denominator of both choices, and that's why really bad stuff usually is made. And so there was a conference here right after I gave that talk, about 3 weeks later, Stronger Than Stone, about Indigenous monuments, reinventing or inventing Indigenous monuments. It was a really important discussion. It was held in this room and for 2 days, and then 2 days in Saskatoon. And Jen Bundy was organizing this with many other collaborators. And there wasn't consensus exactly, but there was a lot of anxiety around Indigenous people sort of getting on board with this sort of war of making monuments to counter monuments and so on. And quite a preference for performative gestures, ignoring, making new things. And I don't think that these things were resolved. But when I thought about it, I was all for that, you know, temporary counter monuments. I do this performance where I dress as kind of like Louis Riel's ghost, and I accost statues of John A. Macdonald. And I did that recently in Ottawa. And I had profound feelings about it in one way, but I also felt that it was a bit of an empty gesture because particularly as Métis people, we don't have a lot of stereotypes, so I got to start building some. But this is interesting. So the city of Edmonton, prior to my talking, this is probably why I was asked to do this talk at Canmore, wanted to establish an Aboriginal art park, and it was the only one. They say there could be another one, but this is the only one I know about. But what they did to make it happen was really profound. And my argument is that Indigenous ways of being, Indigenous ways of knowing, sort of not decolonized ways, but non-colonial ways, as they existed before contact, but as they're being recovered, are better ways in these particular territories. And so what the city did is they worked with Candace Hopkins, and who's a grad from this program. And rather than start off, you know, doing a call, they brought together about, I think there were 6 Indigenous artists from across Canada for consultation. And contemporary artists, strong artists, all different walks of life. And we were invited to consult, but first we were met with Jerry Saddleback, who instructed us on the ways of the land. And I grew up, I was born and raised in Edmonton, but I knew that city in one way. I did listen to the land. I spent so much time in the River Valley, but it didn't speak to me in German, as we heard earlier. It spoke to me in English. It spoke to me through the senses. But with Jerry there, he made a lot of sense out of some of the things I sensed, but couldn't put into words, as he did for others. And that really set the tone. And he felt so at home with the artists that he spent extra time with us. You know, 2 more days of talking, so we'd get it. And so that group then, I have a picture of Jerry. That group then led, it was like more than a year, maybe a year and a half or 2, before the actual call went out, and they took those ideas and they worked them into their program. But they took their time. That wasn't a rush job. And so they decided, they brought a bunch of people together. Again, Jerry, people in the Métis Nation, some Dene people, even they smuggled in a Blackfoot person to talk. And they talked about the territory. And the 12 artists who were assembled, who were shortlisted, I talked to many of them, and they really did change their minds. Instead of being Indigenous artists, making things that could be in any Indigenous territories or their personal work that we're going to impose on people, they worked with the thoughts of the space to make something that would work in that space. And to me, that was really quite extraordinary. So, I mean, look at that list. These are not nobodies. These are people who are in the art world who found a way to make public art. So Amy Melba from north of here, Dwayne Linkletter from Northern Ontario, Marianne Barkhouse from Victoria. She's from the west, but then is now living in the east. Marianne Nicholson from Vancouver Island. Tiffany Shaw, I think she's from these territories, and Jerry Whitehead, also from Alberta. And they came up with a unique vision, but all the people that I talked to said that they were visions that they had sort of cooperatively with people like Jerry. And I think that's interesting. So part of my passage here is moving from an individual artist making gallery art to not being a community artist, but an artist working or engaging community. Oh, I didn't make the cut, by the way. I was pretty disappointed. It was a good project. But then this came along a few months later. They're extending the LRT line and they're putting a bridge across. There's an existing walkway bridge that I remember going up. I think it was in 72 or 3, kind of a footbridge. And they wanted it to have some kind of Indigenous content. And so it did the usual call. 3 people were shortlisted, and I did make the cut. And my excitement soon gave way to abject dread because of the sense of responsibility. So this is Edmonton in 1880, and I didn't know it growing up, but it was based on the French Métis river lot system. And the yellow property is my great-great-grandparents, Laurent and Eleanor Garneau, and the university now covers that whole territory there. And I knew it was their land, but I didn't know that it was the Métis and all of that. And so the bridge is just a little bit downstream there. And as soon as I won that competition, they say, you have to do community consultation, and often people pay lip service to that, go talk to an elder, whatever. But I realized that I really had to do a lot more than that. And part of it is a familial responsibility. So Chief Pappas Chase and my great-grandparents were friends. I won't tell the whole story, but during the 1885 resistance, after the resistance, Laurent was jailed on suspicion of treason, and he was in jail for some time, up to between 3 and 6 months, don't know for sure. And they had 10 kids together. And so Chief Pappas Chase took in those 10 kids and Eleanor, and that was an important thing. So at the end of Chief Pappas Chase's life, Laurent and Eleanor built a cabin for him at St. Paul de Métis, and that story was lost to me. I knew the first part, but I definitely didn't know the second part. And it's important now because Chief Pappas Chase signed an adhesion. This year is the 140th anniversary of signing that adhesion. And so the reserve covers almost all of southern Edmonton. And they were busted up by the city fathers of Edmonton, and the idea was that the land belongs to better men. And so all kinds of nefarious things, surprisingly well documented, how they cheated them off the land, how they divided the bands to different other reserves, and literally just to take over the property. And then there was this group called Edmonton Stragglers who sort of hung around the fort and then hung around the river valley. And Chief Bruno currently says, some of the street people are descendants of those people, generation after generation. So Chief Bruno, Calvin Bruno, is the chief of the Pappas Chase First Nations now. And about 6 years ago, I was doing a talk, and he told the rest of that story that I didn't know, a family story. And Cheryl Arondel was there, and Cheryl is a Pappas Chase descendant, and we've been wanting to do a project together for a long time in that territories, and Calvin said, well, we'll do it, stop talking. And so for the last year, thanks to Kiwi Martin at the University of Alberta and this Creative Conciliations group that I'm part of, we got funding to do research. And we came up with a pretty good set of projects, but many more will come from it. So I want to talk a little bit about the bridge. I'll come back to what project Cheryl and I just finished up. So this is an artist rendering of the bridge. So there'll be the train goes over top, the walkway down below. You'll look up and you'll see 400 paintings that I'm apparently going to be making. And so in terms of community consultation, there's a split, right? So there are several nations there, but primarily the Papa's Chase Band. So Calvin Bruno I'm doing a lot of talks with. But Jerry has this overall knowledge that structures, because Edmonton wasn't just a single place, that was a meeting place. Many people came there. So he's been very helpful, slowly unlocking the territory for me as I've been, I guess, reasonably worthy of it. And Audrey Patra is the president of the Métis Nation. And it's really been very confusing for me because I don't see the division between the Cree and the Métis. They're so intertwined. But there's, for political reasons, a lot of the Métis people disassociate themselves from their First Nations cousins. And it's led to a lot of tensions on this project. So right at the beginning, Amy Melba, for instance, who did Cree syllabics in her piece, she was called out by the Métis Nation thought that was inappropriate. So it's been a real struggle. I can't really tell any of the stories, but it's been bad. So this is the River Valley, and as I said, as a kid, I spent so much time there. I spent time in the art gallery, Edmonton Art Gallery, in the library, but most of the time in that River Valley. So to come back, it's been quite an honor. So talking to the elders and community people, I started doing this design. So this is the first one. So these panels are in dye bond, which is plastic with aluminum coating, and you can cut it any shape you like. So most of the pieces, that's about its actual size. It's 16 feet long, and it's a jackfish. I've got all the animals that are in the area, and in the water and the land. And the bridge will have earth and fire on the shorelines, and then over the water, it's birds and air themes, and the spirits that I've been instructed to put in there. But these are the easy ones. So that's the river lots again. This is a piece from the Royal Alberta Museum. It's called the Edmonton Knife, which has a kind of unique beading design that I've then translated. It's a little bit smaller than that. Then there are a lot of smaller pieces, so a pounding stone with berries on it, and then more quill work also from the collection. So some are quite literal. Papa's Chase means red-headed woodpecker, so that's in there. There are other designs that I'm playing with, and then they start getting abstracted. This gives a sense. But I'm also wanted to have some things that are easy to read, and then things that you would have to be activated by a storyteller. So during the resistance, everyone's locked up in the fort, and the telegraph operator, who's actually in a shack outside the fort, is saying, "What's happening in Batoche? What's happening in Batoche?" So this is Morse code on a bone needle that's 8 feet long that says, "Could be trouble, take care," something like that. And then the other one is the Red River Jig. When Laurent was arrested, his wife, Eleanor, grabbed some documents purportedly from Riel. When the cops were coming, the RCMP, she took them into her washboard and washed them away. So there's a piece like this that memorialized that. So it's a letter from Riel, but you can't quite see it. Elders have then told me stories, but they've told me, put this on there. Oh, okay, what's the story about? Not for you to know, just put it up there. So what's going to happen is, as you go along there's going to be all kinds of things that, oh, that's nice, but especially juxtapositions of two things together or particular things will have a meaning, and only the story keepers who own that story can tell you that story, and I'm just a vessel at that point. I want to do a shout out, I have studio assistants that are helping me. Mostly, I can't do all those paintings myself. About 2/3 of them are Indigenous, and then there's an Indigenous team of graffiti artists that I'm working with in Edmonton. Here's an example. So these are 8-foot circles, the 3D metal, and a teepee oculus seen from above, which Matthew, one of my students, did. Pretty awesome. David Zhang did these, so there's like a teacup with different. So the Métis Nation, for instance, said, well, you got to have this image, you got to have that. And they had very literal ideas, so put those on there. Then I put on a website page where people can send in their stories and thoughts, and then I follow up by visiting. I've been to Edmonton, I think 7 or 8 times in the last 6 or 7 months, talking to those people, seeing the art that they want to show us. So I'm almost out of time. I just wanted to say that, so just coincidentally, when Cheryl and I were doing this performance work and party, there's this Garneau tree that's on the Hub Mall at the University of Alberta, and it's been there for 173 years, and Eleanor planted it, and it was always an important tree to the Métis, for the Garneau family, Métis, but also the Garneau neighborhood. And they're going to chop it down, and I found out, and they were going to chop it like 2 days later, so I put the brakes on, got Audrey Patra involved in the Native Studies department. They were absolutely incredible, and they held it off for this party so that, in the party, Cheryl did all this great entertainment and did light teepee with Joseph Nitauhau. There's the tree. So it was a heritage tree. They're going to chop it down. But what was great is it brought the Garneau family people together and Métis people. There's over 120 or 30 people there. And that tree will then be chopped up and will go to Métis carvers and so on. But it was interesting how this symbol brought people together. So yeah, that's all I want to show. There's this wonderful, I wanted to do this spiral of birds, and this other elder said, I'll bet those birds are cranes. They're never going to tell you what to do, but I bet those are cranes. They are cranes. And Michelle Mackenzie, I forgot Mackenzie's last name, spent all summer making these beautiful birds. Gives a sense of the studio, what a mess it is, all those shapes. Anyways, that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. Are there any questions for David?
That easy.
Just quickly, and this is just the painting question. So what kind of paint are you using if it's going to be out in the public, and it looks like you're being pretty flexible with it, but yeah.
They're not flexible at all. You have to use golden paints, but it's attached to the ceiling, so it's not getting any light. But there's 3 coats. I forgot the finishes. No, they're very technical. The worst part is it's going to be glued to the ceiling, but also had to be screws. And so there's going to be screws in the thing, so that's the last part. But it's going to cost, probably a quarter of the budget just to mount them, so very difficult. There's all these surprises. Like, did you know if you get a big commission, they tax you right away? So I got to pay like 14 grand that I didn't have. So there's a lot of surprises, yeah, lots of bad surprises, in addition to the good ones.
Move your studio onto the reserve, would that help? Or
what's that?
If you move the studio onto a reserve?
On a reserve? I'm not a reserve guy, I'm Métis.
Oh, yeah. No, but maybe you're, anyway.
We got nothing.
Come hang out with me.
Yeah. But luckily one of my fellow profs retired, and so I have her studio next door for another few months. But otherwise, and I have to rent it, it's not free. And I'll be renting other space too, so.
You posted the website for submissions. Are the works that are going onto the bridge also available for viewing on that website, or is there a place where they'll be compiled?
And yeah, there's just a few. We'll be posting more on, but so what I'm doing is, it's so interesting. So I had a meeting of Métis elders, or first of all with the Métis Nation executive. I told them what I want to do, and they gave some suggestions. But when I brought the pictures back to the larger group of elders, they said, oh, so that's what you can do. So if you're doing that, then suddenly they had new ideas, So it's very dialogic, and until that sort of process through, that I don't want to say I'm getting their permission, but sometimes I am. But once they've seen it and things are okay, then I'll post it. Yeah, but not with the stories, just a few stories. Yeah.
Thanks, David. Nice to see what you're working on. So you mentioned that the timeline for the process was extended which is fantastic. I'm curious about, has the timeline for your ability to execute the work also been flexible, or is that?
No.
Yeah, exactly.
The bridge is up in just shy of 2 years from now, so I have enough time, but I'm doing other things at the same time, teaching full time and doing a lot of writing and talking. That's why it was kind of anxiety ridden, but also a pleasure to give up a lot, to have all these students working on the paintings, and exhilarating. Some of them are better than I would do. Trying to get them into a reasonably common style, like by choosing colors and so on, has been difficult. But it was hard to give it up. It was hard to give it up, not to be an individual artist, so I could walk down that whole length and say I did all of that. But it's been actually a great pleasure to share that, share the responsibility as well, and the same with the kind of authorship in the community, that they get to say, yeah, we had something to do with that. It wasn't just the individual artistic genius who came up with this thing. So because it's a community, it's going to be in that community, a place where I don't live anymore. That was really important. But I woke up to it in stages. I also woke up to the fragility of the Métis Nation. We don't have much of a material culture aside from beading and clothing work, and not traditionally in painting. And there was a lot of anxiety about some images that I was showing them. One of their historians really wanted to freeze Métis-ness in a particular period, golden years from the 1820s to 1885, say, and women in long dresses, and they're all Catholics and this kind of thing, and didn't want to deal with the messiness of relations with everybody else. So it's been political and difficult. But I do find that a lot of Métis elders and other elders give artists quite a wide berth, because they feel there could be a revealed truth in that kind of work that couldn't have been said in words, say. So I think it's a responsibility, but I'm more at ease with it. But still, yeah, 2 years from now is not that long. Thanks, Diane.
Great. Well, thank you so much, David.
Is this thing on? Can you hear me? We cool? We cool? Yo. Hello. Weeksas. How are you? And you would say, Ikmen. Nuguam guagudacha. I'm just learning this, so I'm referring to notes. Agua iklam la Sakwalutan. I am from the village of Sakwalutan. This is all I know how to say in my language right now. I've just started learning it. It's a very powerful experience for me. I recently moved back to my home territory after spending most of my life in the suburbs of Vancouver, spending 12 years in Vancouver and spending nearly 5 years in Montreal. Moving back home has been probably one of the most powerful experiences for my work, because I get to wake, walk, and work where my ancestors did. Every day I feel fortunate to be able to wake up and breathe the same sea air that they breathe, to walk in the same land, in the same territory where I walk, and to be able to create where they were able to create. So learning a language for me is the most accessible thing I could do for my culture, and I'm going to try and share it the best I can. I received my ancestral name of Guaguadacha in 1982 at my grandfather's potlatch, my great-grandfather's potlatch. It was my grandmother's grandfather's name. His name was Jimmy Hovel, and Guaguadacha was passed down to me at that point. I'll talk a little about my work. I'm going to talk about pretty much the work that I've displayed here in the exhibit. I'm really excited to be sharing my work here in Calgary for the first time. And I really like to thank the people, the Indigenous peoples of this place, for allowing me to visit their lands and to display my work here. On the screen right now, we have a piece that's called One Up. This was done as an ephemeral mural done in Surrey, British Columbia, on the Chuck Bailey Rec Center, which is a video projection space for the Surrey Art Gallery. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to pay honor and tribute the local First Nations, the Kwantlen peoples, who were the original peoples of that area, who were removed from that area through colonization. And I started taking a lot of conversations out of pop culture, which I have been doing a lot in my practice, And I started looking at video games and looking at how the term one-up is getting that extra life. And so I feel that re-indigenizing the landscape and placing an Indigenous mark on the landscape is allowing us as Indigenous people to get that one-up to keep fighting the colonial fight and keep going on through aspects of reconciliation in this land. I'm going to be talking about this series here. This one's called Interventions on the Imaginary, and it was inspired by Marcia Crosby's essay, The Construction of an Imaginary Indian, where she was critiquing the view of Emily Carr's work at the time and how it perpetuated this notion or the myth of the dying Indian. So when Emily Carr, as Marcia was talking about it through the essay, and how people viewed Emily Carr's work was that she was documenting this dying race, this vanishing race, this disappearing Indian. And what the work that she was producing was perpetuating that stereotype that these people were now gone. As I learned from Marcia for the work that I did for the show that was presented in various places across Canada, but most recently at the Vancouver Art Gallery and in a solo exhibit called We Come the Witness, I talked to Marcia quite a bit, and I talked to an art historian, Ian Tom, who is an authority on Emily Carr. And I discovered that Emily Carr wasn't really the problem. The problem was that how people viewed the work after the fact. So when they see these sometimes empty landscape, these devoid landscapes of villages without the humans in them, without the people there, there was this assumption that this is a document of the people who have now disappeared. But that was wrong. Emily Carr had a profound respect for the First Nations peoples, the various First Nations peoples that she visited along her journeys on the coast, so much in fact that they embraced her into their communities and welcomed her there. So at first this work started off as a critique on Emily Carr, but as I started developing the body of work deeper and working on this exhibit for the Vancouver Art Gallery, my conversation flipped the switch a little bit, where I wasn't being so critical of Carr, I was being more critical of the colonial eye that is looking at her works. And so a lot of these pieces, this body of work became an exercise for me as it first started off, is re-embracing humor through my work. I went through a very strong period, and there is still elements of my work that is very critical of the colonial context. But I really wanted to get back into the joy of making work again, and the humor that I found I kind of set aside for a while in my work. So this is why there's a lot of kind of humorous titles like Spaced Invaders and Chokin' an Ovoid and Photobombing the Zinnequa, She's Gonna Be Mad. Chokin' an Ovoid is an homage to Lawrence Paul Uwalipton, who is a prolific Coast Salish painter. He's a good friend of mine, and we have a really interesting relationship because we're both like Indigenous painters from Vancouver, and it's kind of like this mentor-mentee, but also like he's a little bit scared because here's the new kid coming up and he's got to tear me down every once in a while, which is fine. I love it. It's a good experience. And I've shared a number of coffees with him and I've hung out with him a number of times, and just hearing him speak, it's just really interesting to hear him critique the colonial presence. And I could just hear him at one point, just, because the ovoid is such a big part of his practice. If he's going to insult someone, he's going to say choking an ovoid. What a great spot for a Walmart. This is an Emily Carr painting. Digital intervention on an Emily Carr painting, graveyard entrance to Campbell River. So this is the graveyard entrance to my grandmother's reserve, my grandmother's First Nation, where I'm currently living right now. I'm living in a house that she built 20 years ago. So we have the painting that I did the intervention on, and in the center there we have a photograph I took about 100 years after Emily Carr's first visit of the same cemetery. And then the welcome pole figure of the Thunderbird wasn't moved for any kind of colonial process of building a Walmart or building houses or whatever. It was just moved because it was old. And it went down to the collection in the Royal Museum of Vancouver, and it was repatriated back to Campbell River, and it now lives at the Campbell River Museum. But some local artists, some cousins and uncles did recarving of it for a local development that's about 500 meters away from the graveyard. What I wanted to talk about in this piece is I wanted us as Indigenous peoples to understand that as Indigenous peoples we should be going out there to provide for ourselves, to provide for our community, and in doing that, unfortunately over the years we have adopted very colonial principles of doing that. In the Likwata area of around Campbell River, there are three distinct First Nations. There is the Weebukai people, the Weewakam people, and I completely forgot the other one because there's only three of them. There's only three of them left. The Kwikwah, there we go, it came to me. We all come together to form the Likwata Nation, but we were separated through the Indian Act. Even though we still live in the same area, we have two separate villages. The Kwikwah and the Weewakam people live in the same community, and the Weewakai, the Cape Mudge people live on Quadra Island and have another reserve on the main island as well. But we've been separated, and what we've done is we've started developing all these little retail developments to bring in infrastructure and money for the communities, which I find is important. But I also want us to be wary that we shouldn't be paving over important areas or culturally sensitive areas to provide for our future. As I'm talking about this story, Tanya Harnett is sitting here in front of me, and she came to Vancouver a number of years ago to take some photographs and review the longing exhibit that I did that she referenced in her talk. And we're sitting having a coffee. She had just gotten off the plane, and we're having a good catch up and having some coffee. And she says, "Oh, before we go over there, I'd like to go and I want to buy a camera. Do you know if there's a place in town where I could buy a camera?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, we can just go over to the Res Mall and buy a camera." And she just kind of like stopped and put the coffee cup down and like, "Res Mall?" And I'm like, "Yeah, there's a mall over in West Vancouver. We can go there, you show your status card, you get a camera tax free." And it blew her mind. And we went over there, she bought her camera, and she's got her iPhone, and she's texting her mom, "Mom, there's a mall in a res, we got a gas station," and she's taking photographs of it with her camera to send back to her mom, and it was a fun experience. That was just a little side story. Making a beeline to Heidebuck's Salmonberry Frap for the win, Starbucks fail, LOL. This is a piece about a place called Heidebuck's, and it was a little mom and pop coffee shop in Masset on Haida Gwaii. And in the early 2000s, Starbucks, multi-conglomerate coffee chain, found out that there was this little tiny place called Masset that had a coffee shop that had a name kind of similar to theirs. And they sent them a cease and desist letter and said, "You need to stop with the name, you got to change it, you got to do something else, and or we're going to sue you." And Heidebuck said, "Well, screw you, we're going to keep it and we're going to fight you over it." Their rationale was they are Haida people and they called their men bucks. Colloquially, they just call themselves bucks. These are our bucks. So Heidebucks for them was just kind of like a funny play on words, and they put them together, and that's all it was for them. It wasn't about roasting their own coffee or making pumpkin spice salmonberry lattes or whatever it may be. They just wanted to exist, and they just wanted to make, and they just wanted to provide for the community. Long story short, Starbucks failed, and the little mom and pop shop was able to keep their doors open for a number of years. They have since closed shop. We Come the Witness from 2014, Reinvaders from 2014, and the only thing more pathetic than Indians on TV? Indians watching Indians on TV. Thomas Builds the Fire from 2015. Thomas Builds the Fire was a character from Smoke Signals, Sherman Alexie's book turned into a movie. That one is just this, I like to interject a lot of these pieces with humor and bring pop culture into it. Indigenous iconography within pop culture is usually fairly stereotypical, but with that movie it brought a lot of realities of First Nations life to the big screen, so I wanted to pay tribute to that. With the other two, We Come the Witness and Reinvaders, the Reinvaders is a take on Space Invaders with the video game. But I also started to notice that I was putting a lot of iconography into these pieces that kind of had this kind of otherworldly experience, or these things were turning into UFO voids. And the ovoid is an iconic shape of Northwest Coast art and design, and the ovoid is something that comes together to make the whole. It is an aspect of form, line, and design, along with the U shape and the S shape and various other tridents and such. And they come together to form the image of the bear, the whale. They're iconic on totem poles. But what I'm doing with a lot of my work through this series and through my painting and through my sculpture is that I'm giving the ovoid its own presence, its own weight, its own being, where I'm seeing it as a being instead of just part of a design element. And with that, I started placing these UFO ovoids within these interventions, and this one's done on a Paul Kane painting. It's called Homecoming from 2014. And when I first placed the first one as the intervention in the image, I noticed how it kind of had this kind of otherworldly feel to it. So then I put the other ones in there. This is all done on Photoshop, so I'm layering and putting them back, making them look like they're coming from and going into the backgrounds. And I was also inspired with this alien conversation through petroglyphs that I'd seen that can still be seen in and around my traditional territory. And to me, when I see a lot of these petroglyphs, especially human figures, they all have really big heads, like big heads or elongated heads. So I kind of see them as maybe aliens, and I was kind of speculating that at some point in my ancestors' future that maybe aliens had come down and said hi to us. And this was possibly the first iteration of that, so I have these aliens coming home. And what was fun about this painting, as I noticed after the fact, is that the way that Paul Kane painted the figures in this image is that there's the one person holding the dip net, and he's looking up in the sky just randomly, and it looks like he's witnessing these things coming down. And then we have this person in the canoe in the foreground and the canoe in the background kind of breaking that fourth wall and looking at you, the viewer. And I kind of see this guy right down here as looking at you directly as a viewer going, do you fucking see this right now? There's aliens coming out of the sky. This is Tel Chakotay, BRB from 2014. And it is again kind of referencing that alien culture. And I was just being pretty facetious and humorous with this piece, but I started thinking about how Indigenous peoples, especially from North America, are presented in pop culture, movies, and televisions. And this one is in reference to Chakotay, who is the first officer of Star Trek Voyager. And this is the Star Trek franchise that gets lost like 70 years in space, and they're taking a journey back home, and it's going to take them 70 years. Anyways, I think it was in episode 3 of the first season, and Chakotay was... He played, his character was someone of Peruvian descent, I believe, and he was played by a Latin American actor, and he had this face tattoo, and he, as a youth, he never really connected to his culture, except for one day when his father was taking him through the jungle to some sacred spots, and he noticed all these kind of petroglyph markings on the earth, and markings like the tattoo that he now had on his face around the area where he was visiting. Anyways, the Starship Voyager comes across this planet in the 70 years away from Earth. And as soon as they land on the planet, they see these markings that are reminiscent of the markings that were found in the jungle where Chakotay grew up. Anyways, he comes across this group of aliens called, I can't remember, Lindsay, do you know what they're called? We're talking about Star Trek yesterday, so I'm looking at you right now. I can't remember what they were called. Anyways, they come across Chakotay, and they recognize the marking on his face, and they say, where did you get that marking? And Chakotay says, well, the markings of my ancestor. And then they say to him, well, how come you don't know us? And he's like, I don't know. And the aliens are like, well, you should know us because you have this marking, and we visited your people in the past, and we showed them how to get to where your people are from. And they go through this whole dream sequence of he touches them and he goes into this dream brain sequence. And these aliens actually tell Chakotay that they helped his ancestors cross the Bering Land Bridge from Asia to North America, which was a very popular theory in the 90s and previous, that our ancestors came over from Asia into North America and we found the Promised Land. And they gave these Native Americans, quote unquote, access and knowledge of how to manage the land. So as Indigenous people, through the iconography of Star Trek, we didn't really have inherent rights to the land or inherent understandings of land. We were given it to us by aliens. So I thought that was kind of funny. They're coming quick. We have a better hiding place for you, Dorvan 5. You'll love it. And Skina, Beam Me Up. These are both in reference to other Star Trek episodes. And I'm not going to get into them because it's just going to make me sound like a jumbo nerd. And I know I already do sound like a jumbo nerd. Yeah, shit's about to go sideways. I'll take you to a Mariand. You'll like it. It looks like home. This is an Emily Carr painting of my home village, of the village of Saqualutan on Quadra Island, just adjacent to Campbell River. Amerind is a planet in Star Trek the original series lore where Kirk and the gang come across this planet that is inhabited by, quote unquote, again, Native Americans. It turns out that this race called the Preservers removed Native Americans from America and brought them over to this planet to let them live there unimpeded by the effects of colonization as I look at it now. And so what I'm thinking with this painting is that this ship comes in and is beaming out my longhouses and is beaming out the people within them and bringing them to this planet. And that's in contrast to the story of how those longhouses were actually brought down. My great-great-grandfather, Chief Billy Assu, brought those longhouses down in the name of progress. He didn't believe in assimilation, but he thought that if they were able to adopt certain colonial ways, he'll be able to provide a better life for his family in the village. That has become a contentious point within the village with the various families that inhabit it, but that is what that painting is about. And here is a couple of the last two in the series. It's called Preserver 1. Well, it looks like we got them all. See, don't you feel great knowing that these people will never know, will never experience the effects of colonization? And the Preserver 2 just gives us a little emoji face of, oh yeah. And then I have a little photograph of it next to it of Emily Carr actually sketching the village of Tanu for this painting, and I just inserted some very light ovoids in there to kind of speculate that maybe these ovoid aliens were actually floating around when she was painting this thing. And the away team beams down to what appears to be an uninhabited planet, and this is the one that is in display in the show here. And again, it is just kind of taking this theory of that this landscape was uninhabited before anyone had come along to see it, and that is my wife and daughter for scale. The Paradise Syndrome. The Paradise Syndrome takes on its title. Am I doing okay for time? I'm just kind of rambling on here.
I think you're over time.
Am I over time? Okay, I wasn't even paying attention.
If you want to quickly introduce this series, and then we can move along to Mark.
Sure, sounds good. So this is the Paradise Syndrome, and this looks at the colonial markers that are meant to divide and separate us. And these are done on marine charts that my grandfather had given, that I'd gotten from my grandfather after he passed away. And these two are of Quadra Island, so the one on the right over there, right over there. That's Quadra Island, so that's my home village right down there. And this is the tip of Quadra Island over here. And the breakouts that I have on these pieces are of the reserve plots that the Canadian government had left for my people. And when you get into the one on the right, voyage number 32, I scoured this map and I broke out of the copper shape all the reserves that could be found in this territory. So ancestrally, my people, my community would have access to this entire territory. And this is a very large chunk of territory. But through the act of colonization and the Canadian government coming in and not even bothering to sign treaties with many peoples in British Columbia, gave us these little tiny plots of land known as reserves. They're not to scale on the copper, but they are broken out of that. And what I wanted to do with this copper shape, which is the piece that is up top, this copper shape is usually held by a chief, and it symbolizes his wealth. And when we think about wealth from Western society, which we live in, to a potlatch society from where I am from, wealth for me is about giving it all away, and that is how I'm deemed wealthy. So what I'm saying here is that I'm breaking out that wealth, and I am actively destructing it because I am showing the Canadian government, I am showing them shame for what they have done to my people and to all Indigenous peoples. So with that, I'll just kind of blast ahead. That's the latest series that I'm showing in there, but that's my time. Thank you.
Just do a little sound check. Is that all right? Is that good? Yeah. This? Okay.
just to further my setup, I brought some notes on my iPad. But I want to start by saying it's really great to be back in Calgary and to be a guest of the Indigenous peoples of this area. Special shout out to Sitka and the First Nations that frequent Banff. I spent a year there in 2004, 2005, and it was a very important time for me. The first two people I met when I got there was Cheryl Rondell and Candace Hopkins. And I was just saying, like, I have this bad habit of making assumptions. And I made this assumption that Cheryl was Candace and Candace was Cheryl. It was really awkward, but so happy that Cheryl was here yesterday. And I was making notes during her presentation, and I really loved how she talked about learning Indigenous language and the meaning of Indigenous words. And so I want to bring some of that to my talk, and I'll start with my last name, Igloliorte, which is how I commonly pronounce it, and it's often mistook for Italian. But there's an Inuktitut pronunciation that I get corrected on if I'm in northern Labrador or other places, which it's pronounced more like Igloliorte. So I'm going to be talking about briefly my practice, the work in the show, and I really appreciate this making relations heading or topic or prompt from the First Nations here as a way of framing our talks. So I'm going to be talking about some of my relations and some of the relations that I've been a part of. So think about making relations. I put up this clip from Facebook because when I was getting ready for this talk, I was kind of going through my images, and I came across this kayak. And the kayak has become an important part of my practice, but what I especially love about this image is that another Inuit vehicle, which is part of my practice, the Kamotik, or the dog team sled. But this one, I don't think it's a dog team sled. It's just like this smaller Kamotik on the back. I think that was for portaging the kayak around between different pieces of ice or something. But as you can see in my comment, it's got harpoons for days. And one of the things that we should all keep in mind about the kayak, it's this international viral success, this Indigenous Inuit form, which is all over the globe. But what I've read about the word kayak is that it's a hunting boat. So there's this part of the Indigenous practice we shouldn't forget, like as so many people use it as a recreational vehicle. It has a purpose. Another thing about this image grab that I got here is you can see my icon up there. I had this way of latching my skateboard to my bike for getting around Vancouver, where I live right now. And I do appreciate being a welcome guest from the Indigenous peoples of Vancouver as well. But a big part of my practice is vehicles and skateboarding, and you'll see how that manifests. So inside the show, you'll see 69 of these paintings, these pairs, these diptychs. So I've decided only to show one of these images for my talk, because you can go and check them out inside the show. But these are my diptych still lifes, which I paint on phone book paper of kind of vignettes or still lifes within my studio. And one of my big focuses on this is having an observational practice and thinking about how my way of seeing or kind of putting that out into the world is something that I really like. And I'm reminded of Cheryl talking yesterday about this telling and retelling. And Candace Hopkins had a residency that she facilitated at the Banff Centre. I went back as a resident, which was called storytelling. And I remember writing up my application to do this without knowing how it was going to manifest, but to show things from different angles in that spirit of storytelling. So the phone book paper, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this, this body of work, but the phone book paper is my way of referencing a location. So I started this series in Montreal, but I've always kept my little phone book from Labrador around, and that, based on place, kind of sets the scale of the work as well. And you'll see all the little small Labrador ones because there's the population difference is so different. So just moving right along, here's a couple of images of the Kamotik. There's, you know, it's definitely a contemporary image, but of like a pre-colonial way of getting around with the dog team. And then over here you have a slightly post-colonial image of a wooden kayak, which you can tell has been made with machined wood, and this plywood box, which has been adapted for the Kamotik. One of the things that I love about the Kamotik as a vehicle is that it has been adapted, and it shows for me like the flexibility of Indigenous culture, that it's not frozen in time, and it's not something that's vanishing. It's something that can come along with the time. And so that different materials could come about, and that it could have different purposes. I grew up with these going behind on skidoos, and so that was a big part of my growing up in Labrador. Oh yeah, so this is what we were doing some of the times. Ice fishing, sometimes it was just partying. Like, it was great. We were teenagers, just go party to party on our skidoos. Oh yeah, we had so much fun. But with the Kamotiks here, this is like some ice fishing going on. And you see that they have these wooden boxes on them. And the one there in the back, you see how it has like a flag in one corner, but it also has these diamonds as well. And then there's this diamond here as well. I couldn't find the image, but my sister Heather, and thank you, Lindsay, for mentioning my sister yesterday. I'm really proud of my sister who teaches at Concordia, does a lot of cool work all around the world. But anyway, this design, she sent me an image of a pair of mucklucks of sealskin boots, which had like the same diamond design like cut out of sealskin, so two tones. And so I love how this design has kind of made its way onto this surface. And from studying painting at ACAD, I love how it's like post-painterly abstraction. You know, it's flat, it's not brushy, it's just like a shape, you know? So yeah, I always love, and I got a vivid memory of my father painting his own diamond on a Kamotik. And so when I was doing this project, and having not have made a Kamotik myself, I got my dad when he was visiting once to walk me through it or to work with me on it. And so we had this kind of knowledge transfer and storytelling that was going on in my driveway in Sackville, New Brunswick, where I was living at the time. My father is the first Inuit judge in Canada, and since he's retired, he's been part of different commissions and programs where he gets to travel a lot through the north. He's very connected all throughout the north. And here he's actually talking about dog team slaughtering, which was something that happened as people were relocated into communities. And so this Indigenous way of accessing the land was either inadvertently or proactively being taken away from Indigenous people. And so people had strong feelings about it. It's very recent in history, and so they're talking about that aspect. It's a very dark chapter in Canadian history. And likewise, climate change has severely affected Indigenous people in the north. And from my own personal experience, it's something I get quite upset about because when I was a kid, Labrador was frigid, like in the winter, and now like you can go skateboarding at Christmas time. You know, it's like if you don't believe in climate change, you're you got your head up your ass. It's like you're really pushing some bullshit. Like, anyway, how do you talk about these things? It's very difficult. But okay, before I get to how to talk about it, I got to tell this other story. So I did one artist project, which I'm going to spare you. I'm not going to talk about. But I'm going to mention that I got asked to do this performance with my sister. Sonny was there in PEI. But beforehand, I had to get my comic put back together because at the time I didn't have the right line, and it eventually fell apart. But to relatch it together, I was working at a Indigenous science camp, and I asked the director from Lennox Island First Nation if I could bring this to experience with the youth. And so I got to do that knowledge transfer again with the youth, which was really special to me. Okay, I've been this guy. Some of you have been in the room while I've done it. And when I worked in Banff, we'd have these meetings. Some of you have been in those meetings, Rita, I'm pretty sure. Hour-long meetings once a week, and I just start drawing. I would draw people's shoes kind of as a way of indirecting it, you know. But I love to draw. I love to work from observation. And so, but it's this, the area of the portrait, and I really appreciate Dayna showing her work, is that it's such an intimate thing when you're making a portrait of someone, if it's drawing or photography. And with this dog team thing, one of the things that I've always thought about is that everybody has like these, you know, like really, like real connection to their dogs. My sister has 2 dogs. It's real, you know. My mom doesn't understand it, but anyway, so for this performance, what I thought I would do is make portraits of people's dogs attached to the comic. So it's kind of funny. It's like they're sled dogs, but they're domestic animals. And I was introduced to, and I wanted it to be fun, right? So I was introduced to this material called Shrinky Dinks. You can get it at Michael's. You're meant to draw or whatever on them and then stick them in the oven, and then they shrink. But we're using a heat gun here, and we're doing this method because it would crinkle up. So while I was like drawing these people's dogs in Charlottetown, PEI, we get into these conversations about this, like, oh, what's this? This is a dog team sled. Oh yeah, this Inuit thing. And like, do people still use these? Hell yeah, there's dog team races still all across the Arctic. Oh, 4 minutes, okay. There's, you know, like people attaching their skidoos. It's this Indigenous form that's been adapted. All that great stuff that I was talking about, and then get into some of that stuff like that my father's on this commission, that climate change has really affected it. And so we're having this conversation, and it's real. And people love it. Like, these people are so stoked that they got to bring their dog to an art event. They're just, you know, and I got to make this little sketch, yeah, so that this one shrunk. And this, in a weird kind of turn, or when people were talking throughout this talk about, throughout the days here about the spirit, like, you know, for whatever reason, this actual sled dog came to the thing and had his portrait taken, and he looks kind of, in the drawing, kind of stoked about it. This is my favorite. Yeah. It's a Pomeranian. It's got papers. Some of you might get that reference, but yeah. And I got these little hole punches from Michael's of the snowflakes and the dog paws. Anyway, I had a lot of fun. Okay, so while I was at a residency in Banff and then in my master's program, I made a lot of these paintings of kayaks or kayaking. And actually, in Inuktitut, the plural of kayak is kayak. It's kind of like the plural of Inuk person is Inuit, right? It's not S, it's a little bit different. So I made a lot of these paintings, and they did really well in like critically, commercially, and all this other stuff. But I always felt a little conflicted about it. As much as like, okay, I came across these images from Labrador, and that's like my ancestors. And this is like perhaps the last time, for a while there was kayaking going on in Labrador. So it was like, whoa, I'm really like engaged by this imagery, but the kind of like, the way it's kind of coming across, it sort of reinforces that vanishing Indigenous person, or I don't know, it could have that reading, especially how it's like from decades ago. So I was always kind of conflicted about it. So when I got a job at Emily Carr University and was out in Vancouver, I was just really turned on by like how much kayaking activity there is going on in the city, and what an opportunity it was to learn how to kayak. And so I got okay, I'll spare you the long story, but yeah, that's me, that's my kayak. Really hyped on it. And my first instinct, because I did all this observational stuff, was to make observational drawings of it. And I put this like stack of chairs there because I did this as kind of like a warm-up. It's like, I'm gonna make some kick-ass drawings. People are gonna be like so blown away by them. But that was kind of like the wrong place to be coming from. I did make some sketches I quite liked. I really liked this one. And I did make this, was pretty happy with, but like I wasn't really feeling it, like overall. I felt like I had overcalculated how I was going to execute this project, and it wasn't fun. Okay, I just want to say one thing institutionally. This is the Aboriginal gathering place at the last campus, and this space, Sonny used to work there with Brenda Crabtree, who's the program manager for the area. This space was a grant that Brenda wrote and got a bunch of funding in order to create this space for Indigenous people at Emily Carr. And in the new campus we just moved to, we've got an even bigger space. And I said, Brenda, you must have ripped up some blueprints. And she said, yeah, I did. She's a force to be reckoned with. And part of like buying this kayak is I didn't really have a space for it, and I needed to kind of work with the university to do this. And I used university funds, like they gave me some funds in order to buy it. And so I had to make an argument to buy it. I had to find a space to put it. And Brenda was there like the whole time along. And I gotta just give it up for those Indigenous people that create space and create opportunities within these institutions. It's really important, and it's certainly allowed me to further what I do. Okay, I know I'm over time, but I'm gonna go with it. Yeah, sorry. Sorry, not sorry, hashtag. I'm just going to keep going. I'm feeling good. Yeah. One of the things I wanted to learn for sure how to do was an Eskimo roll. Now, we don't say Eskimo anymore. We say Inuit, right? But I love how the Eskimo roll, it's possessive. Like, that's of the people, right? I'm an avid skateboarder. Hooked up with my friend. We skated his ramp in his garage here in Calgary. It was tight. One of the things that I went to the pool in Kitsilano where you can kayak on a Friday night 4 or 5 times. I didn't get the roll, but I never, and I was this for a show in Winnipeg, but I never questioned myself that I could learn it. I knew that I could do it, and that came a lot from skateboarding. Because I've done a lot of stuff on a skateboard. I'm not crazy good or anything, but I've done a lot of stuff on a skateboard, and I know that that's from deciding that I can learn it. And as an educator who teaches painting, and like I like to teach the difficult stuff in painting, like observation, that's how I approach it. We can all learn whatever, and it's I think that's a cool thing. But like, one of the parallels, in the gesture here, you see these are both vehicles, and they're both kind of long, and the gesture here is that they both rotate along that long axis. So rather than kind of force that observational thing that I was trying to do up something, I, kind of thought about, like, how could I, this is a grip job on a skateboard, and I could talk about that, doing a grip job on a skateboard for a while, but I'm gonna let that go and just say, This is like a diagram. It's not like an observational drawing, which is where I originally thought I was going with this. It feels good to let go of stuff like that. And this is a performance I did at the University, UBC Okanagan in Kelowna, where we got, I didn't actually catch this kickflip, sorry. This is a bail. I tried it for maybe 20 minutes and then security shut it down. But that was kind of like part of the performance. It could happen or not. But I did go and film a kickflip with this board in St. John's. So we got Peter Morin filming in the background, and then my son Noah is photobombing there. And then talking about the spirit, just above my paddle there, this video is in the show. You see that dark spot just over my paddle? That's a seal photobombing my performance there. And I think, it's part of that spirit, that you can't, it just comes, And then I really love how these two things, like my painting, this is with a townscape, and then here I am with the townscape in my kayak. I really like that. This is how it came together for the show. I had to work with the curator to kind of figure it out as it's going along, and I really appreciate the curatorial team here at ACAD for working with me on the stuff in there. And this is some of the advertising, and I was really kind of hyped that some of the advertising used my board as like the iconic work or whatever. And I love this yellow, right, that came from my kayak. And the thing about the yellow is like, okay, how Indigenous is that? I don't know. I always feel, I was talking to Sonny about this yesterday, it's like I kind of feel like I'm always looking over my shoulder, like who's going to say something about the work, like, what's up with your yellow kayak? But, okay, talk about the spirit. At the Winnipeg Art Gallery, there was an Inuit art show right around the corner. You could walk from space to space. And there was this print by Luke Engelhaluk. Sorry, I butchered that. And there's this kayaker, he's looking out, And for whatever reason, Luke chose this color for his kayak. And this print found its way into that show just off of mine. So, I don't know, something to that. This is my work for the show. I'm not going to belabor this. Okay, I'm out of time. Yeah, I'm gonna let go. Just had this amazing elder come to our space at Emily Carr. I facilitated it. It's really a privilege and an honor to work as a professor and make opportunities like this happen. We had a really amazing chat after the AV didn't work out. But I was talking to her about, this is her and her father coming back from a hunt. And so I was looking at that print and I was like, oh, I was like, okay, what were you hunting for? She said, caribou. And I looked at it, I was like, are you lying on top of a caribou? And she's like, yeah, I'm lying on top of a caribou. And it's like, oh yeah, that reminds me of the Petit Prince, where it's like something in the bag. But anyway, we had a great talk. This is my very last slide. We had a great talk, took her around the university. She was being translated through her son/grandson, and all in Inuktitut, and people just loved it. I had people coming up for me for days, just telling me how important it was to meet her. Thank you all very much.
Testing, testing. Can you hear me? Yep. Okay, I'm going to jump right into it. Today I'm going to talk briefly about my installation called Assimilate, that is part of the exhibition Future Memories, Present Tense at Illingworth Kerr Gallery. My ancestral name is Wase, and it means a shining woman. As an Anishinaabe person that migrated to Australia in the late 1990s, but now living between Australia and Canada, I have often asked myself, where do I belong in a country that is not my own? How can I retain aspects of my own indigeneity, yet still feel connected to other Indigenous people and their communities? Enrolling into a visual arts degree at Sydney University, in 2000 provided a gateway for making relationships and establishing connections, therefore exposing me to contemporary Australian Aboriginal art and artists. It is here my sense of belonging gradually became apparent. I was welcomed into Australian Aboriginal communities, and together through art we shared cultural and colonial stories and histories. For Australia and Canada share a common colonial past. Both countries are derived from British law and are also developed welfare states. Their principal suppositions to social policies and the process that support them are similar. Although these common elements permit similarities, what is of significance is the assimilation policies of Indigenous people in Australia and Canada and the role the Church played in executing those policies. It is worth noting that the assimilation policies in Canada focus on registering Indigenous people as status Indians, whereas in Australia, it was by denying Australian Aboriginal people their presence via the international law of terra nullius. Colonialism, Protestant and Presbyterian streams of Christianity played a significant role in the history of Australian and Canadian governmental assimilation policies for Indigenous peoples. In the 19th century, the Australian and Canadian governments, along with the missionaries, shared an equal belief in civilizing Indigenous peoples. The Christians believed Indigenous cultures were pagan, and it was only through Christianity that the Aboriginal population could be saved from extinction. Therefore, in both countries, the missionaries carried the dual message of civilization and salvation. In an effort to turn Indigenous people away from their pagan beliefs, a complex system consisting of government bodies and missionaries pursued a civilizing mission in education and religious instruction of Indigenous peoples. In Canada, the Indian residential school system, in brackets IRSS, as I'll refer it to, was the main avenue for this, whereas in Australia, missions, managed reserves, and few educational institutes were the enforcers. Some of the civilizing agendas, or better yet, slogans of the government and the churches were in Canada was to kill the Indian in the child. This is beaded on this collage portrait here. In Australia, the slogan was smooth the dying pillow. In the 1800s, the missionaries, in line with the government consent, operated boarding and industrial schools in Canada. When Canada became a nation in 1867, the desire to require more land and resources became apparent. The Canadian government negotiated treaties with the First Nation people in order to require more land and control resources. In this image, this is one of the many chiefs that signed the Treaty 1 in Manitoba. In 1890s, the boarding industrial schools were eliminated and the Indian residential school system was implemented by Prime Minister Sir John Macdonald. This is him in the collage. These were operated by the federal government and the churches. The revision of the 1876 Indian Act in 1920 saw First Nation children become wards of the state, and attendance at the residential schools were mandatory for all First Nation children. By the 1930s, there existed a state-run church-operated network consisting of Catholic, United, Presbyterian, Methodist, and Anglican orders with over 80 schools and 17,000 Indigenous students. The first school to open was the Mohawk Residential School in 1831, and the last one to close its doors was the Gordon Residential School in 1996. On the Australian side, a political aid to dispossess Aboriginal people from their Aboriginal reserves, missions, and stations were created and driven by different philosophies undertaken by different groups, such as churches, state government, and Aboriginal people themselves. Missions were developed by the church to house Aboriginal peoples, teach them Christianity, and to prepare them for work. Christian individuals operated the reserves they managed. Conversion to Christianity involved separating of the children from their parents to keep them away from their Aboriginal culture. The earliest institution to civilize Aboriginal children was the Native Institute funded by the Governor Macquarie in Parramatta in 1814. Between 1910 and 1970, many Australian Aboriginal children were forcibly removed from their parents under the assimilation policies of the Australian federal government, which missionaries carried through. At the IRSS, institutions were overcrowded due to more government funding that they needed. The more students they had, the more funding they got. Some institutions were considered derelict and posed lethal health concerns for the students. In the Northern Territory, in Australia, institutions such as the bungalow, the half-caste home, and the missions also had critical overcrowding, water shortages, disease, and poor living conditions. Students received an inferior education compared to general public school students. In Canada, Indigenous students received up to grade 5 education, and in Australia, only up to grade 3. On the missions, instruction was focused on religious teachings rather than education. Schools and missions were unhealthy, unsanitary, and overcrowded conditions contributed to outbreaks of tuberculosis, influenza, and in Australia, leprosy. These factors caused many children to die or suffer from major illnesses. At St. Michael's Indian Residential School in Duck Lake, Saskatchewan, over half of the children in attendance died. This type of treatment Indigenous students were subjected to upon indoctrination, such as group delousing, mandatory wearing of uniforms, cutting of the hair, particularly sacred braids, in the case of First Nations, and the assignment of numbers in place of their names. Faye Heavyshield, a former residential school student, remarks, quote, "I can recall all the names of the teachers, the nuns, and the priests, and most of the numbers I was for those years," end of quote. Violations to any of the codes of practice, such as speaking their native language, performing cultural practices, or talking to the opposite sex, or incorrectly citing prayers, resulted in excessive punishment, such as denied food, being forced to kneel for prolonged periods, cutting or shaving of the hair, and being strapped or publicly humiliated. At some institutions, children were exposed to scientific experiments, and also the electric chair was used. Many Indigenous children experienced sexual and physical abuse at the institutions and missions. The sexual abuse was not only at the hands of male figures, but female predators as well. This tremendous authority and control these institutions had over every aspect of Indigenous children's lives, such as how they dressed, ate, slept, and spoke, along with the failure of the staff and supervisors to report alleged abuses. Not all institutions, missions, and reserves were devastating. For some people, the church provided protection and a safe place away from the violence of the colonizers, and remember the missions or reservations fondly. They learned new skills and used them to illuminate their cultural history. Many of the people who make up Indigenous communities are survivors of these government assimilation policies, or are children or relatives of these survivors. These assimilation policies and their effects have generated what is known as intergenerational trauma, for as Australian Aboriginal John McDean has said, quote, "Almost every Aboriginal family without exception was touched by the practice by the church and the state of taking Aboriginal children from their parents for the benefit of the child," end of quote. The installation Assimilate here at IKG is not only to shed light on these previous silenced Canadian and Australian histories, but also to offer a celebration of Indigenous culture, and most importantly, to offer healing. When the jingle dress is performed, it is said the beautiful sound of the jingles when they hit one another is a sound that will offer healing to Indigenous people. This is why the jingle dress are present throughout the installation. The images on the jingles are a collage of many of the individuals that make up Indigenous communities in Australia and in Canada. At times, the smell of sweetgrass will also be present, offering a soothing and calming effect. That is, if you happen to be there when the hydrosol is sprayed. Thank you very much.
Testing, testing, testing. Aaksokgowamoski, Nastudi Danaka Apuiskamapi, Aaksokgowawata, Ditutu Siksika. Good to be with you this afternoon. From Siksika, my Blackfoot name is Little Brown Boy. Like Cowboy, I still have my childhood name. I haven't got an adult name, so I will be a child for the rest of my life until I get another name, which is wonderful, and I can't wait. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me. I'm just going to touch a bit on my work in relation to making relations, but also future memories. And when dealing with future members, we're looking at this sort of idea of time. In relation to making relations, how do I locate myself? I am Blackfoot. This is my local. This is my country. So I was actually in Saskatoon in Cree territory, Treaty 4, for 13 years, Métis territory, as well as Dakota, and had a very enjoyable time there. Just moved home last year, so I've been away for 13 years, but now I've been home now for a year, moved back to my home reserve. I'm living out at Siksika in my family home, and reconnecting with the land. And that's something that I think is important to say, is that I do come from the land, and as previously stated, most eloquently by Cowboy, it is the land that teaches us. I just want to back up a bit. When I was attending here at Alberta College of Art and Design, I was doing a lot of research around physics, in particular Blackfoot physics, and just a quote from David Peat: "The concepts of time that are shared by the people of Turtle Island are far more dynamic. For them, time is animate. It is the activity of spirit. Time is alive. It is not independent of us nor of the rest of nature. Time is addressed in ceremonies and people's relationships with the movement and must be renewed. And in this way, all of time can be accessed from within the present moment, or perhaps it is better to say that within the sacred space of ceremony, one can enter the flux of time and more within its vastness." And further, Leroy Littlebear: "Western knowledge operates from a linear, singular view, whereas Western knowledge views the world from order beneath chaos. Whereas Western languages are very noun-oriented. Knowledge is about you, first person, in relation to everything else in a relativistic sense. Aboriginal knowledge has a very different coming to know. It is holistic and cyclical. It views the world from chaos underneath order. Its languages are process and action-oriented. Knowledge is about participation in and with the natural world." So when I was here, I was looking at this idea, and in particular, I do a lot of work around the bison and the historical slaughter of the bison, for which there were 75 million estimated in North America, and in a very short time, almost completely eliminated. But you take a look at, from the new physics and stuff like that, we are all just atoms, and basically held together with these vessels. And so it works really nicely with ideas of Indigenous knowledge, where everything has a spirit, that we're all actually the same. So I think at the time of the slaughter, I think about the idea that that energy was released into the universe and still exists in the universe. And as a Blackfoot person, I'm able to reach into that universe, take that energy, move it through me, and create works that still speak to time immemorial. And so for me, I am a continuum of my ancestors that the buffalo still feeds me in a contemporary sense through the art that I make. So the work that's in the exhibition, Future Members, is Seitutu. What time is it? I wonder about time all the time. I want to live without time, no time. I think about time in particular, I think about time as being actually the biggest colonizers of us all. That it is imposed upon us, and that time is what sort of constantly keeps us in these places that we don't necessarily want to be. We always want to be somewhere else. I wonder about the accumulation of knowledge through time. I wonder about our individual, collective conscious and unconsciousness in relation to time. I think of time as it wanders through our understanding of space, place, and experience, its effect on our individual and collective psyche. What I see, do you see? We, as human beings, seem to be infatuated with time. We never have enough time, or if I had the time, we constantly try to control our time, stretch time out, slow things down, or speed things up. Technology was supposed to give us the time. Instead, it controls our time, loses our time in an interweb of perpetual image, suspect knowledge, and trivial pursuits. Time is always of the essence. Our understanding or misunderstanding of our place within time, how we reason, how we construct our beings in relation to the tangible and the ethereal, how we can construct anything to suit our need, that need usually built upon our individual or collective desire to control our times. Time is a colonizer. So when I think about all that, and in coming back to Siksika, it brought me back in time. And because if anybody follows me on Facebook, they know I have a great struggle with the internet right now, which is actually good and bad, and any sort of communication, which actually is really interesting because it's isolated me. And I kind of like that, but it kind of drives me crazy too. And so it's interesting that I've actually gone back to the land and I roamed the land, and I remember as a young person, that's all I ever did, is I roamed the land. I looked at the land, and I look at these ideas of inner space and outer space. You go down into the rock, into the lichen, and you see these little worlds. And so for me, I'm sort of starting to reconnect with that again. And I guess I should be moving my slides. I totally forgot about that part. So anyway, so these images are just in relation to the historical slaughter of the bison, actually, which was unveiled this morning here, Fuse 1, which really talks about the historical slaughter, but also talks about the resilience of indigeneity, indigenous people. I am totally fascinated with nuclear war and annihilation. In some ways, I was looking up the word nihilist the other day, and I sometimes think I'm a nihilist. And that time, that we're really nothing. We're just constructions of each other, of everything else. So I'm sort of playing with those ideas right now. I think about this piece, Beyond Redemption, is going to be opening or be part of the Wild West show at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Montreal this coming week, which talks, about that historical slaughter and its effect upon a lot of Plains tribes. Again, the resource extraction. So when I start thinking about the land, I think about the assault on the land, how the land is charged with these histories, and how the resources are used to destroy us, to destroy the land, to destroy time. So I think about that a lot. And when you think about sort of the nuclear explosion and Alberta and Saskatchewan and the uranium industry, how we are all connected to these things through time. So in Zeitutu, I started to play with it. I started to go back to this idea of play and using the things around me to create things. And then through that, this idea of building mythology, because I think about myself in the national or the international. The national, I'm an artist, but I sometimes think I'm just a construction of curators and of those who like my work and, and all that sort of stuff. So I'm sort of playing with this whole thing that really I don't exist. And so it's interesting. And then I think about internationally how Romanticism plays into this idea of the Indian, and how when I go into the international scene, how I have to deconstruct that for them, or else play right into their Romanticism. So I get to do that. And I think that's kind of fun, because it really, when you think about it, this is all a performance. We're all performing every day. And so I find that's interesting, that how we perform in relation to each other and why we do that. And that's why I kind of love the whole genre of performance art. So again, picking up these things, playing with different things. These were in my father's collection from years ago, and he would just give it to him from somebody and had these little feet. And so I thought about this idea of creating these little entities. And so you'll see this in real time soon. But it's also, too, playing with ideas of superstition and stuff like that. What does this really mean? Is it scary? Is it not scary? Is it playful? Is it not playful? So again, these constructions of ideas. Bones, and how bones are physical memories of a time. And so interesting, it was so beautiful to walk through Joan's exhibition yesterday. It was pretty emotional for me because I absolutely adore and love Joan. And it was so interesting to see how the pictographs, and all of a sudden I'm back to the pictograph, and how the pictograph is something that is embedded within my DNA as a Blackfoot person, how we told our stories on stone. And so for me, all of a sudden, here I am, full circle, back to this play with stone. And the natural elements. And I think that's one of those things that I love to play with. I don't want to say too much about each little thing because I want you to make up your own stories about what they are. For me, they have specific meanings and ideas, and play with ideas of time and place. Are these from the past? Are these in the present? Are these from the future? You know, when you think about it and how they all play with each other through time. New works in terms of the tree rings are relation of time, but the work that I have in the show is that a tree that's been eaten and consumed by something else within it. So the destruction of time. So again, these ideas of notions of time. New petroglyphs, playing with ideas of creating my own language using the petroglyph and how I will play with that. Stones, our grandfathers, they do tell us of time, and when you start taking those apart, they tell us a great history of the movement through the universe, because we are all stardust, and we will turn back into stardust. We're temporary, we're completely temporary. The icon, it's again, the idea is that sometimes I know not what I do, and so it's interesting when I think about that. Again, I just want to throw these few things in there, the idea of that how we control the land and exploit the land, how war, and we're in a time of the possibility, again, of great war. Do we ever learn? Can we ever learn? How quickly we forget. And it's one of those conundrums that I keep coming back to, and I wonder about. But the land in itself is what brings me solace, what brings me to a place where time can stand still, where there is no time. Because I really want to eliminate time from my life. And the only time that we have that we can hear is our heart. That is our time. That's our time machine. When you can't hear that anymore, the gig's up. Marking of time, the sands of time. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Awesome, and I am sorry about the constraints of time. But,
sorry.
You know, we have an opening to attend. I don't know if you heard.
Yeah.
At any rate, in an effort to begin this panel discussion, actually, I'm very curious to hear if you have questions for each other, if there are things that you'd like to chat about first before we open it up more broadly. I don't know if anyone wants to dive in.
What time is it, Adrian?
We've got no time.
Suzanne has given us permission to go over, so yeah. At any rate, I don't know if anyone wants to start.
I was really interested. Is this on? Yeah. Okay. Thanks. For your work about Christianity, the relationship of Christianity and the residential school, that's like. I know, like, when I think about that relationship, I find it so difficult, and I don't know, it's such important work, and I really respect that you would create this work to address it, because I've thought about addressing and stuff like that, and I've always been like, oh man, like, actually, I kind of have in one piece, but for me, like, it put me in such a dark space, and so could you talk a bit about your experience working with that, and like maybe how you manage like working with such a dark history?
Yeah, it was very sad, and a lot of times when I was researching, I was crying because those stories are really bad, and I was thinking, well, you know, these stories need to be told, you know, but how do we display that in a visual art sense. You know, how can we tell these atrocities that have happened? You know, and I've been working a lot with collage over the past couple years, and I've come across quite a lot of images, and then I thought, well, collage is the answer to talk about things that have happened, but at the same time, you know, so on one side, on one hand we have the Indian residential schools, and on the other hand we have the stolen generation in Australia, and I started to notice these parallels that came together. And I was thinking, okay, well, yeah, it's very bleak, and it's very sad, and it's very depressing. But at the same time, it also shows, you know, that both cultures have survived, and we are still practicing our traditions to this day. So the installation is kind of, on one hand, it's a celebration of culture, because you see a lot of Indigenous people in traditional dress or performing traditional ceremonies. But on the other hand, you also see these, you know, atrocities that have happened. So I wanted to put the two together so it wouldn't be so bleak and depressing, but also have sweetgrass there, and because of the limits of the gallery, I couldn't burn sweetgrass, and I didn't want to have it hanging beside the crosses. So I thought, okay, what can I do? And I worked with Tina, was from the Lodgepole Center, was very helpful, and we drove around and tried to get some sage oil so we could put it in a humidifier. But the sage oil that they had here didn't really smell like anything. Like, it kind of smelled, I don't know what, like, but it was a no-go. So thought about sweetgrass, and then they have this actual hydrosol that you can spray, and you'll have a smell today when you go to the installation. I'll have sprayed around, so that when you enter this space, which is kind of dark, but on the same side it's kind of like a celebration, you'll have this calming effect of sweetgrass, which as Indigenous people we love. I have a question for you, Sonny. Emily Carr. So I noticed with your images, did you think of like how Emily Carr has like culturally appropriated the Indigenous people of the West Coast, and how by reclaiming those images, what your thoughts were at the time in those paintings?
That was the kind of driving force behind the series at first, was reclaiming those images that she was appropriating. But I think when I think about appropriating, that wasn't really her intent. She was really just documenting the people that she appreciated and that she loved. Like I mentioned in the presentation, she did travel the coast, and she did connect with a number of the Northwest Coast peoples, and a number of them did embrace her into their communities and lives for the amount of time that she spent there. She was given an Nchanuth name of Clewick by the Nchanuth people as a way to honor her for being around. And so when you think about appropriation, and you know, when we look at those works, because like I said, that was my first thought about it. Even when I saw them, you know, when I was an art student, thinking about appropriation and how our images have been stolen and being used for different purposes and not for their intent. But I think as much as we look at her and assume that she was documenting the dying race and understanding through the research that she wasn't, that I don't think she was appropriating those specific images. Now, there was a series of work that she did that she didn't like doing, which she signed with her Clewick monitor, where she made ceramic vessels. And she was commissioned by a company to make these little trade trinkets to satiate the hunger of that burgeoning tourist market, of coming to a place like Canada and bringing home something that is of, you know, quote unquote Indian iconography. Yeah. And so she made all these little trinkets out of ceramics, and in talking with Ian Tom and the research that he did, is that he discovered that she really didn't like making those things because she felt like she was not representing the people. But she had to do it in her mind because she had to put food on her table. As recognizable as Emily Carr is today, being a woman painting in that time, she didn't have the recognition of her male peers, especially from the Group 7.
Yeah, and First Nation people didn't have a recognition at all at that time.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's interesting because it really does kind of mess with your brain about you thinking about how she didn't have the recognition from her male peers, and the Indigenous peoples didn't have the recognition from anybody. But here she is, a woman of white privilege, going in and using imagery, looking at it now in the context of appropriation. It's a lot to unpack and deconstruct.
Yeah. So in a way, like, I see your images as like a double appropriation or a reverse appropriation, because you're actually taking her paintings and you're like putting your signature on them. So you're appropriating her images, and then you're also putting your signature.
Yeah, as I started working on the work specifically for the exhibit at the Vancouver Art Gallery, and then speaking with Ian Tom and Marcia Crosby, and I changed my stance on how I viewed what she was doing and how she was making her works and what she was representing. When I first started the series, it started off mostly as a way to re-indigenize the colonial landscape. So I was taking theories of tagging from graffiti culture and placing these images on top of them as a way to re-indigenize that colonial landscape, to put a presence back onto the land. And what I did for the first 10 or 15 of that series is I did a simple ovoid marker on top of her signature to recolonize her space. But through the research that I did leading up to the show, I changed that from a solid ovoid to an ovoid that enveloped her name, and I felt that it was more of a collaboration with Emily Carr after the fact.
Thanks.
I got a question for Adrian.
Sure.
Okay. I was just on a panel a while ago in Victoria, and we were talking about time. And I was thinking about like your obsession with the atomic bomb, and then like where you're talking about the millions of buffalo that were exterminated, which is just as violent as an atomic bomb. For something that's like a marker of time, I don't know would you consider it a marker of time, like this extermination of the buffalo, and how does that fit in with like a expanded view of time, or what some of the concept of time you were talking about?
Well, it definitely is a marker of time if we look at it sort of from the colonial perspective of linear time. But from a Blackfoot perspective, again, yes, there was a slaughter, and that's very physical. But the fact is that they had spirit, and so that spirit is always there. So it's this thing about this play of how do we reconcile, I think, that within ourselves in terms of understanding. Well, I do anyway, I can only speak for myself, is how do I relate myself to that loss? But then it is a loss, but it isn't a loss. You know, because if I truly believe what I say, that they're all right here with me. As Cowboy said, this room was full of our ancestors. And I actually visualize that. I can see them all sitting there. It's amongst you, and it's something that I think that's interesting within concepts of Indigenous knowledge about how we are only really figments of our own imagination. And so I wonder about that, because then that really has no time, because it's timeless, I think. It always gets me crazy when I start thinking about time, because I always I go back and forth in time, and then I think about the sci-fi world and how that we play with time and time machines and going back and forward in time. Do we actually have time travelers? I wonder about that. And I think about shamanic practice and how that takes you into the universe, out of time, but into another time, another place. These travelers, I think these ideas of physicality of leaving, like this, we all obsessed with actually leaving the planet, when I actually think that many of our ancestors actually did leave the planet, and they don't have to physically leave, because the spirit maybe goes someplace else. And of course, that's a construction of my own ideas of the universe. So I don't know. I guess that's a sort of a hard question for me. Is that time is boundless, really, and time. I don't know. I just don't think there is time. I don't know.
Well,
That's your question.
it's interesting to think about time in relation to sci-fi. The movie that came out a year or so ago, The Arrival. I don't know if you've seen it or not. It's a real interesting movie. So it's about a scientist who is tasked with learning this new alien language that's being presented to people of Earth and trying to decipher if it's bad or good. As she learns the language and finally figures out how to interpret it and become fluent in it, she discovers that that language is time, and that it could bring her forward or back into the past, and she can interact with the past to change the present or the past. And what I found interesting about that, as I'm watching that, I was thinking about my grandmother and her passing, and how she, as she was laying in a hospital bed, she was reverting back to her language, reverting back to the Likwata dialect, and she was having conversations. Not with me or my mother or my uncle or her siblings in the room. It was with the ancestors. She would be speaking in Likwata and interacting with these people. And it was interesting to hear her siblings talk about that after they would witness it, because they would recognize that she was talking to her parents and her grandparents, and they were there in the room with her. And I think it's too easy for us to brush that aside of just the mind doing something in the grasp of death, but maybe it is how time works. We come back to a different state and we're able to see what is in front of us that is hidden. And it becomes interesting. So when you're speaking about time, and I've said time so many times, it becomes interesting to think about how we interact with the universe and how we are just part of it, and we isolate ourselves from it. And you spoke about that isolation, and I think about how if we are interacting on this earth within the universe, we aren't doing it justice because we are actively destroying it.
Well, then too, like the fact of the matter is, we're actually traveling at hundreds of thousands of miles per hour right now through the universe. We're expanding through the universe, flying like crazy, and yet here we are. It's a mind fuck.
All right. Before I put it to the audience, I would actually be curious to hear from you, Mark, about how it is that you feel maybe your diptychs engage in this conversation about time.
Okay. I have to think about that for a second.
You can have some time.
You need to.
So for a second.
We can come back to it if you'd like, but I'm very
I think one of the interesting things to me about those paintings, maybe just on like a practical level, is one of the motivations for them for myself is that it was taking me forever to mix color. And so I was like, if I'm spending all this time mixing color, I need like twice as much painting out of it. But it was like, and the other kind of thing that I noticed about doing that large series of works is just being in the studio and just having off days, on days, or whatever. And when I look back at the work, I have no recollection of what mood I was in at a given time. And so, but I guess one of the things, I can't say something specifically about time. I had to talk my way to this, but that is that just that process of making an observational work, and how typically those are about 3 hours each. You just kind of slide into a different way of thinking or being in a space, and it's really it's a rich experience in and of itself for me. And making all these decisions as I'm making an observational work, I feel by like kind of putting two representations out there, I get to share some of that experience, because I can show how the decision went one way in one painting, the decision went another way in another painting, and so I get to share some of that experience with a viewer, being hyped on working observationally. So, yeah.
Yeah, certainly as a viewer of those works, as hopefully we all will be in a few minutes, there certainly seems to be a kind of meditation on practices of temporalization, right, where the paintings represent only slightly different scenes, and so the space between them seems to be a space that, whether we like it or not, forces us to contemplate an experience of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're very fascinating. So on that note, is there anyone here that would like to ask a question or make a comment? Who knows what?
Hey guys. All right. Existentially, like I'm popping in and out of time constantly, you know, like, so I just want to know, you know, you feel love, you feel it. It makes time stand still. That moment you're alone, you know, in let's say an environment outside of a society, like a forest, let's say, and you really do feel time. You really, or you don't. It's gone. It's. I was just wondering, in that moment of love, do you feel like you are pushed by hatred at any point? You know?
Oh, I think so. You know, I think again, like for me, the most when time stands still the most is when I'm on the land, and all of a sudden, even though the sun rises and the sun sets, and within that there is a time, you feel the love of the earth, I guess, and that's the thing, is your connection to that earth, and how that earth nourishes you, how that earth, you are a part of that, you know, and you know, it's like the truth is, we come from it and we're going to go back to it. So it's an interesting thing. So I think that there's that love in there, but there is a timelessness in that, I think. Yeah, absolutely. And well, hate, well, I know these are all just concepts, really. You know, it's just how you feel, and I think that definitely. I'm gonna have to think about that one for a bit. That's interesting.
Hey guys. This is more for Rolande. Just noticing something when you're talking about the work, and in particular, like, I mean, we haven't seen it, but like what was on the screen, I had to like kind of stop beating just because of the subject matter you're kind of talking about, and just like we have these concepts of like not doing things when we don't feel good, and I wonder, the subject matter is just so heavy, and having both of those different experiences, being here and also overseas in Australia, just how that must have been like moving through that work, or what were your experiences with doing that work, because that's a teaching that I received, is, and everyone's different, right, is like you don't do work when you're not feeling good or things like that, and I wonder as artists like how we move through that or rectify that, or when we're dealing with like heavier subject matter.
Yeah, it was a difficult piece, but I think these histories have to be told, and just hearing stories about the stolen generation in Australia, and they also have like a website up that addresses similarities from the IRSS, so they had the same like confessions, I guess, if you want to say, on their website, and it was difficult, but at the same time I felt, you know, that it has to be told, and as Indigenous people, we are healing, we are, you know, we're still strong, and first I just thought it can't just be all this, you know, like terror and horrible events, so I thought, okay, what's the balance here? Also, you know, to look at the people, so that's why it's a collage, like of the jingles. So the jingles are made all screen printed here at ACAD, because I'm artist in resident. All screen printed here, but it offers a balance. So in a way, I feel comfortable with that installation, because there is healing going through, and a lot of us are healing about this intergenerational trauma, and we are getting stronger and stronger, and it's affected all of our communities. So yeah, it was difficult, but you know, has to be done.
My question, I have two questions, kind of. One's kind of a question and the other one's a statement, and it's for you, Sonny. I'm wondering about the ovoid form and how that's being interpreted by your community, because you're plastic, it's plastic, and it's moving through space, and I'm thinking about Norval Morrissette and how he got in trouble for bending imagery that was considered traditional. And the second one is, have you read Where the Borgs Are by Thomas King?
No.
It's funny.
Okay. I'll write that one down. So the first question was about the ovoid and how it situates itself in the community. It is a very quote-unquote traditional object. For me, I guess recently I've started, like I said, I started to see the ovoid as having its own presence, having its own personality, having its own being, as opposed to how you see it interacting with imagery from the past and even contemporary images being made today by community-based artists, where it situates itself as part of the whole, right? It comes together with another ovoid or an S shape or U shape and contained within a form line to make an imagery of a bear or a raven, or situate itself in a totem pole. I think I do get in trouble, and I welcome that critique from my community, as long as it's coming directly from my community, right? I can understand, because the ovoid is so iconic to the Northwest Coast, it's used by a number of different Northwest Coast peoples. I would appreciate their critique if they think that I'm doing something wrong with it. But for me and a number of artists working within this discourse of contemporary Northwest Coast art, quote unquote contemporary, it's all about recognizing how it's always been a steady stream and a steady incline of innovation and becoming something different. Yeah, I think the easiest, I don't know if it's the easiest way to talk about it, but I showed this work in a solo exhibit in Campbell River, so in my home territory, for a show called Homecoming. It was a solo show at the Campbell River Art Gallery. I was really excited to do it. I hadn't shown my work back home in probably about 10 years up until that point. So it was really important to bring all these different conversations, because my work is so diverse. So I had my painting series, I had my longing mask, I had stuff from the interventions, I had the drum-based works and the works that dealt specifically with the residential school and my grandmother, and a work about myself and my experiences with racism. So I was bringing a very large body of work to share with my community. And I was giving an artist talk during the opening, and it was community members, there was people from my community, there was my aunts and uncles there, and one of my uncles that I noticed wasn't there at first is a big inspiration to me. He's an artist. He makes, it's always hard to say traditional and contemporary, because I don't want to make those those things seem different, but it's just the easiest way to explain it. So he's more of a traditional based artist. And I'm giving this talk, and I just finished speaking about the desk piece for my grandmother, and I was talking about some of the painting works around the ovoid. And he walked in with my auntie, and they did a quick little loop behind and walked right out. And I was like, okay, I gotta go sit down with Uncle, and I gotta figure out what's going on here. And I hadn't seen him after that for about 3 months, because he went out fishing, and I was just out walking one day, and I saw him getting ready to leave to go to his studio. And I went up to him and said, hey, it's good to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. I saw you come in during the opening, and I never get a chance to see you, and I hadn't seen you all summer, so I really wanted to come by and get your opinion on the show and what you felt about it. And he just said, and that was it. And I was like, okay, I can sense it. And what I was telling Mark about over breakfast yesterday is that I understand his hesitation in embracing this very contemporary view on the ovoid, because for him, in his generation, he was told that was wrong, right? And so he wasn't allowed to at some point in his past, and his father, who he learned from, wasn't allowed to make this work. And they tasked themselves as these knowledge keepers to produce
this imagery to make sure it stayed alive, because it is a visual language, and they had to produce it to make sure it stayed current. And I think their hesitation in seeing people like me and others abstracting the ovoid is curious to them, because they see it as it's not in its intended purpose. But if I was ever able to sit down with him and have a conversation where he didn't feel uncomfortable about it, I would just say it's just a continuation of what our ancestors were doing. So.
Right, we're going to take one more question.
Hi, I just wanted to get your opinions as artists on the political dichotomy on the issue of what's become the contention around the celebration of the 150th. Do you see it as a dichotomy? If so, if not, talking about issues of reconciliation, is it possible to celebrate and demand acknowledgement of these historical falsehood, or these historical I apologize. These historical atrocities. Is it possible to appreciate the 150th anniversary of Canada and demand that we address these issues? What is your opinions on this issue as artists?
First of all, it's not 150 years. Indigenous people have been here for a very long time, so the 150th celebration to me is like problematic in itself, like the reconciliation. So I just find it's problematic. It's kind of superficial, in my opinion. It's a very social and politically charged subject matter, and a lot of Indigenous communities, today are without drinking water. There's a lot of disease, there's a lot of abuse, blah, 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 blah. So what is the Canadian government doing? So they're having this big celebration, but what are they doing for these communities that have no water, or the water is polluted? What are they doing for Indian residential schools, the people who have experienced this trauma and this intergenerational trauma that's going on? So they offer money for how much abuse you've encountered during those times. That's problematic as well. So, they have this big celebration, but really, what is at the heart of it, in Canada here?
After I got my BFA, I got a degree in education and taught on reserve for a year. And from that experience and an opportunity that somebody clued me into, I actually worked for the Department of Aboriginal and Northern Affairs as an education program officer. And I got to work with so many First Nations in Atlantic Canada, and it was such a wake-up call to all the injustices and just a part of that First Nations experience that I wasn't familiar with, right? Even as an Indigenous person, but being from Labrador, and there's just so much, and I was getting corrected constantly on things, and there's so much that needs to be addressed. I don't even know where to start, but like that. So I agree, like to be in a position of celebrating when the work that needs to be done just to live up to agreements that haven't been kept. It's really tremendous.
Maybe I'll answer it this way, because I think it goes back to the last question. I've been thinking about it. We are the sum of everything, love and hate. Within our DNA is encoded, it's a timeline of time, and it's been scientifically proven that trauma and everything that gets embedded within that DNA. What we get to do right now is actually recognize that and go back to those little compartments, open them up, and hopefully heal them in order for the future, if we choose to pass on our DNA, for the future to not have to relive that moment over and over and over again. So I think when I think about the 150, I think that's one of those little compartments that we have to open it up and see, the problematics within that, and hopefully within that we can move that into the future to create a better DNA.
That's how it works, right?
That's how it works. That's how it works.
It's simple.
I think I agree with Rolande, that the celebration of 150 years is very superficial. We have Indigenous histories in this country that have gone on for thousands of years. There's been evidence unearthed in what is now known as British Columbia that predates people here previous to the pyramids. But when we're talking about the colonial celebration of Canada 150, it all becomes about cake and balloons and having your opportunity to have a picture taken with our shirtless Prime Minister. And that, for me, that's just a celebration, and it's a celebration of ignorance, because a lot of people who want to celebrate Canada 150 do so because they believe in the utopia that is, the perceived utopia that is this place, right? But my standpoint has always been that for this place to be a real utopia, we have to learn our ugly history. And I want Canadians to dig back over these 150 years and learn everything about our history, not just in relationships to the atrocities that happened to the Indigenous peoples, but what happened to the Sikh people who tried to come over here in 1914 and got turned away. The Japanese internments, the Chinese head tax, these are all blights on our perceived utopian society. And coupled with the genocide and continued contentious treatment of the Indigenous peoples in this country, I don't think it's really anything to celebrate. As an artist, it is difficult to rectify that with the money that's being placed in front of you, going, okay, we're going to give you a project. Do you want to do this project? And it's like, okay, well, I have to feed my family. So I kind of want to do this project. But if you want me to do this project, then you're going to have to understand it's going to have a critical conversation about what this place actually is. And if you can't handle it, then I don't need that money. So that's about it.
I'm reminded of that quote, you can't handle the truth.
Can't handle the truth.
All right, well, thank you all so much. I just want to say with the utmost sincerity, I really appreciate you sharing your perspectives and your practice. So thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic.
And thank you to everybody for your attendance today. This concludes our program. I hope you'll join us next door for the opening.